Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. Today, we talk to Chris Pinnock, Executive Vice President for NALC Branch 9, about the latest going on at the Postal Service. We'll also be talking about what's going on in Southern labor and taking a look at bosses here in the South. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number. We will be opening the lines during our conversation with Chris and taking calls after we let him off the air. So get the phone number ready, 844-899-TVLR. That phone number is 844-899-8857. You can also leave us a voicemail at any time throughout the week. Just a reminder, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm. But we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or just make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We have a bunch of really cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. We have our logo dad caps and a bunch of union-made matchbooks just hanging out in my office waiting for me to send them to you. So head on over to tvlr.fm/store and get those. Finally, if you're a member of a union, then think about getting your local or national union to sponsor the show. We could not do this program without the support of several unions. So reach out to us for more details on that.
Hey y'all, let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, WGOW, WLWI, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. As most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who want to amplify the voices of the working class here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the 70 people who are watching us on YouTube right now, but only 14 of you have liked the stream, so go ahead and like the stream if you haven't. Amanda says good morning. Quirky Geek Girl says good morning. It's a truly effed up world where my best friend is hoping Big Pharma is going to step in and save Medicare and Medicaid so she doesn't lose her medical coverage. She lives in Washington State. Yeah, really, really bleak and concerning stuff happening related to that. Tucker says, love you guys. Cladonia says, good morning. Mark says, did you know Kentucky has 9 out of the 10 poorest counties in the United States? I did not know that discrete fact, but I don't suppose it would surprise me, but I did not know that. Jada says, happy Saturday, y'all. Jada, happy Saturday. Thanks for tuning in. Let's go ahead and jump right into last week in Southern labor. Here is what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from February 14th to the 21st. Just a reminder, this segment will be truncated. The full content will be in the newsletter, which you can subscribe to at tvlr.fm. The newsletter lands in folks' inboxes every Tuesday afternoon. In new union campaigns, 13 workers at King and George in Louisville, Kentucky, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, UA Local 184. 60 security guards at United Parks and Resorts in Orlando, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Security, Police, and Fire Professionals of America, SPFPA. 16 workers at Starbucks in Dallas, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with Starbucks Workers United, as did 19 workers at a location in Marietta, Georgia. 38 security guards at Kerberos International in San Juan, Puerto Rico, filed a petition to hold a union election with a Spanish name private security union. 23 workers at Copart in Lebanon, Tennessee, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Copart Collective, presumably some independent union. 60 workers at Oakview Health and Rehabilitation in Conway, South Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Steelworkers, USW. In election results, 4,200 workers at Amazon in Garner, North Carolina, voted 2,447 to 829 against unionization, with the Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, a huge loss in the campaign to organize the shipping behemoth. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, former workers for Stacey Abrams' New Georgia project are alleging that the organization fired them for attempting to unionize with the Teamsters Local 728. The union plans to file an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB. Workers at Casey Trees in Washington, D.C., who plant and maintain trees for the city, are unionized with the International Association of Machinists, IAM, are saying that management is stonewalling at the bargaining table and refusing to negotiate in good faith. The IAM has filed an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB in response to management's refusal to bargain. In strikes and bargaining updates, Hilton hotel workers near Orlando, unionized with Unite Here, Local 737, held an informational picket outside their workplace last week as the company has refused to give them a fair contract. The workers, some of whom are making as little as $11 an hour in Orlando, Florida, are fighting for higher wages and a better pension. Federal workers continue to be attacked by the current administration. Some workers who elected to participate in the Fork in the Road initiative last month and had that election accepted then were fired anyways. At least one such person had their firing reversed after the increased media attention. Among the people fired that were frantically rehired was the acting chief of Defense Nuclear Safety. WTOP in Virginia spoke to a disabled veteran and Trump supporter who was part of the layoffs despite having good performance reviews. He told the station, quote, "I voted for Donald Trump, but this is not what I was expecting. We didn't think they were going to take a chainsaw to a silk rug." WSB-TV in Atlanta spoke to a veteran who had worked for the local VA for 12 years who was also laid off. The Washington Post details several such stories, including one person who was fired and who had worked for the Park Service for 25 years. The VA's Office of Research and Development largely hires based on time-based appointments, not permanent career staff. 83% of the staff are on those temporary appointments, and they have been instructed not to renew contracts. This is the same office that developed the cardiac pacemaker and the nicotine patch. The office is one of the largest hubs for medical research in the world and could be looking at losing, again, 83% of its staff in the coming years. Laid off federal workers should look into the Unemployment Compensation for Federal Employees program to help them during this transitionary phase. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, and other federal worker unions sued the government over these firings. In their statement about the suit, they said, quote, OPM's egregious firings were made on false pretenses and violate federal law, including the Administrative Procedure Act and other statutes defining federal employment and OPM's role. OPM, the complaint asserts, acted unlawfully by directing federal agencies to use a standardized termination notice falsely claiming performance issues. Congress, not OPM, controls and authorizes federal employment and related spending by the federal administrative agencies, and Congress has determined that each agency is responsible for managing its own employees. Boeing in Huntsville is laying off 71 more workers due to changes at NASA. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama, which represents some 300 workers at United Launch Alliance, took a strike authorization vote last week as their negotiating committee heads into bargaining with the company. The contract expires in May. In Fairfax County, Virginia, the American Federation of Teachers, AFT local there, is fighting against proposed budget shortfalls by the school's Board of Supervisors. In Lorton, Virginia, the Transportation Communications Union, TCU-IAM, held an informational picket at Amtrak to protest the employer, Drummock's, stalling at the bargaining table. The union says workers there are paid half the industry standard and have gone a year without a raise. IAM District 837 is preparing for negotiations with Boeing in St. Louis, Missouri, which will begin in June. And the Executive Board of the National Association of Letter Carriers voted unanimously against sending a revised tentative agreement to the membership. They're going straight to arbitration. Political and legislative updates. In Texas, after they banned abortion, new data analyzed by ProPublica reveals that for women hospitalized when they lost their pregnancies in the second trimester, the rate of sepsis shot up by more than 50%. From 2019 to 2023, as the maternal death rate declined by 7.5% nationally, the maternal death rate increased in Texas by 33%. The Trump administration announced that Medicare will no longer cover most telehealth services starting 1st of April. The IAM is calling on the Trump administration to enforce strong penalties against Chinese shipbuilders because of their alleged unfair labor practices. The Texas Observer reported on an ICE prosecutor in the state who ran a literal white supremacist Twitter account saying things like, quote, "Yeah, I'm in a courthouse waiting on warrants. Turns out there's a lot of B work to be done to make mass deportations happen." Another quote, "America is a white nation founded by whites. Our country should favor us." Another quote, "All blacks are foreign to my people." Another quote, "Freedom of association has not existed in this country since 1964 at the absolute latest." He further clarified that that post was referring to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And finally, he said, "I'm not a commie, I'm a fascist." Again, this guy in charge of immigration law. Super normal country. The Corps of Engineers has identified 600 energy and infrastructure projects that could be fast-tracked under Trump's declaration of a national energy emergency. Louis Dejoy announced he is stepping down from the post office, a frequent target of attacks from postal unions over the years. Messages I got from letter carriers were more of a concerned nature than a joyful one, fearing what might come next. Speaking of what might come next, the Washington Post reported that Trump is planning to completely ignore the law and remake the Postal Service by executive order, dissolving its congressionally created independent structure and absorbing it into the Commerce Department. When asked about the reporting, Trump did not deny it. Trump's nominee for Labor Secretary, of whom much was made because of her support for the PRO Act, backtracked on her support for the PRO Act in her confirmation hearing, specifically the provisions that would repeal state right-to-work laws and the joint employer rules, two of the biggest provisions in the damn legislation. In Alabama, HB 89, a bill increasing access to maternal health care, which was authored by local Democratic Representative Marilyn Lands, and SB 22, a bill cracking down on companies that violate child labor laws, passed in the House and Senate respectively. HB 29, however, which would add more red tape barriers to unemployment insurance for Alabamians facing joblessness, also passed the House. An Alabama grand jury is calling for the abolition of the Hanceville Police Department due to its rampant corruption, and Kentucky unions are fighting a rollback of state workplace safety regulations. If we missed anything, let us know at tvlr.fm/contact, and we'll try to include it in next week's roundup. We're going to take a break really quick. We'll be right back with the Executive Vice President for the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 9 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to talk about the latest with the Postal Service. Stay tuned.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. We'll be opening the lines momentarily, probably here in about 20 or 30 minutes. particularly interested in hearing from letter carriers as we take a deep dive into what's going on there. We have some 140 people watching us on YouTube now. Only 40 folks have liked the stream, so go ahead and like the stream if you have not done so yet. Henry says, good morning, first time. Glad you're here. 23 says, good morning, fellas, from DE. That's Delaware, presumably. Very cool. Glad to have you here. Golden Taurus Finance says any less than $94,000 top carrier pay is a pay cut. I agree. Gizmo says proud NALC member. It's shocking how many people I work with still support the Dejoy administration. Dakota says mail carrier here. Thank you for what you guys do. Thank you. MC says go Trump. Zed says, if they mess with my letter carrier and favorite postal clerk, it's on like Donkey Kong. There you go. Love that. Love that kind of energy. We got to protect federal workers, our letter carriers and postal workers out there doing God's work. Matt says, yep, we'll be fine. Takes an act of Congress to change the USPS like laws mean anything to this administration. Speaking about, the idea that no problem with Trump running the country because, Congress would have to change it. Well, that's not what Trump thinks. Creative Dragon says, hello from Oklahoma. Love your show and it's useful, important information you're getting out there. I've been seeing more and more filtering on YouTube of elected Democratic and Capitol news. Not sure exactly what you mean by the last thing, but appreciate your support. Bipolar Zero, and this is really an important point, said, it should also be noted that the current head of the Commerce Department is Lutnick, the guy who was pushing to privatize the service during the first term. That's exactly right. Creative Dragon says, my husband works for the VA and has been the target of constant threats, poor work conditions, and retaliation. A whistleblower report he made was dismissed without cause a couple days ago. Gizmo says, I'm sure the service to the country will be better for America if owned by billionaires. Yeah, for sure. I'm almost positive that was sarcasm. The J-Tay says, letter carrier here. Knowledge is power. Thank you for spreading it. Thank you for tuning in. Ashley Wright says, hey, from Kansas. All right. So, like I said, we're going to be diving into the updates on the Postal Service. We'll be speaking to Executive Vice President for Branch 9 momentarily, but basically wanted to run through the information first. And there were more postal news happened in the last week than has happened in a very long time. So the first piece of information is that bargaining concluded, right? The tentative agreement was voted down. So that triggered 15 days of negotiations between the National Association of Letter Carriers and the United States Postal Service. 15 days, that 15-day time limit is set by the NALC Constitution, so it could not go longer than 15 days. That 15-day period ended on Tuesday, the 18th of February. The day after that, the executive board of the NALC voted not to send an amended tentative agreement to the membership for another vote, presumably because there was not enough movement, and they're moving straight into arbitration. This is what NALC President Brian Renfro had to say about that update.
Post Service did move some on what they were willing to do economically, which included moving around some of the different economic benefits for us, and that included some increased general wage increases. But after discussion of that yesterday, the Executive Council unanimously voted to not enter into a modified tentative agreement. So we do not have an agreement to send out for ratification, and as the information we posted on the website said yesterday, our next step is interest arbitration. So we have selected arbitrator Dennis Nolan to serve as the chair of the 3-person arbitration panel. Our case, we've been preparing it for over 2 years now. Since the ratification vote was certified by the ballot committee on January 31st, our attorneys and professionals and everyone that's involved in the preparation of our interest arbitration case have been hard at work to take all the preparation we did previously, fine-tune it, so we are ready to go. As soon as we confirm those dates and when the hearings will begin, we will put that information out. Both the NALC and the Postal Service have an interest in doing this as soon as possible.
So there you go. Going into interest arbitration, we'll see what happens there. Obviously, the rest of the Postal Service news is going to be affecting the outcome and whether or not arbitration even happens. The first of the rest of the Postal Service news is that Postmaster General Louis Dejoy announced he is stepping down. Just a reminder, Louis Dejoy was a Trump appointee from Trump's first term. He lasted the entirety of the Biden administration, which frustrated many postal workers because Louis Dejoy came from the private logistics industry. He had an interest. Every dollar that did not go to the Postal Service went into the pockets of people like Dejoy and the company that Dejoy came from. So obviously had a real incentive to destroy the Postal Service. Put in place by Trump, not removed by Joe Biden. Here was Brian Renfro's reaction to Dejoy's impending resignation.
This morning, Postmaster General Louis Dejoy announced that he was moving on, that he was going to leave the Postal Service. He is not leaving immediately. He's going to remain during the transition to the next Postmaster General, who will be selected by the Postal Service Board of Governors by law. The board, that will be their top priority here in the coming weeks. This morning, we put a statement out on the website that made really clear what we expect and we need in the next Postmaster General, and that is someone committed to the Postal Service as the public service that it is, someone that values employees, particularly letter carriers, and someone that will work to modernize and improve the service that we provide to our customers, the universal service that is so important to all the people that we serve. Postmaster General Dejoy's tenure has been an interesting period of time. It started during the height of the pandemic and has continued out of the pandemic and into a major time of transition for the Postal Service. And while we have certainly not always agreed on things, that's most evident by this long, drawn-out period of collective bargaining that has, been a fight for approaching 2 years now. We have worked in good faith with the Postal Service under his leadership, and we have achieved things together, most notably postal reform legislation with the passage of the Postal Service Reform Act of 2021 that was signed into law in April of 2022 that is going to have significantly positive long-term benefits for the Postal Service.
What he was talking about there, just a reminder for folks, the Postal Service in 2006, I believe it was required to pre-fund retiree health care costs for 75 years into the future. No other organization, private or public, frankly, across the entire world, I don't think, has ever been required to pre-fund retiree health benefits that far into the future. I mean, think about the idea that every single year in 2006, the Postal Service was required to have the money to pay for retiree health care costs in 2081. They had to have the money on hand to fund the retiree health care benefits, not for people that hadn't started working for the Postal Service yet, for people that had not even been born yet. I mean, just an absurd piece of legislation that was explicitly created to hamper the Postal Service, just so that way, over the intervening 10, 20 years as this law was operative, people could point to the Postal Service and say, look how much money the Postal Service is losing, when almost all of the money that the Postal Service was losing was due to that. One of the final updates about the Postal Service came shortly after the news of Dejoy's impending resignation, which was the Washington Post reporting that Donald Trump is purportedly looking at illegally dissolving the Postal Board of Governors and absorbing the Postal Service into the Commerce Department, as a chatter pointed out, importantly, which is run by Howard Lutnick, a billionaire who proposed privatizing the Postal Service in Donald Trump's first term. I say it's illegal because the structure of the post office is set by Congress. The 1970 Postal Reorganization Act is what created the structure of the Postal Service as an independent government corporation. Donald Trump cannot, by executive order, undo legislation. That's just totally against the, just totally set aside, right? Set aside any conversations about, is this going to be better for the Postal Service or not? It's not, that idea is not privatization, but the idea that Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies have more direct control over the Postal Service does not seem to me to be a recipe for success for postal workers or consumers. But set all of that aside, right? All those arguments aside. The idea that Donald Trump, by executive order, can just totally undo legislation is patently unconstitutional and should be very concerning to people that he is purporting to have this sort of authority. Donald Trump, when asked about the Washington Post reporting, did not deny it. Here he is being asked about it by a reporter.
Reports that you were considering merging the United States Postal Service with the Commerce Department. Can you elaborate on if this is something you're considering?
Well, we want to have a post office that works well and doesn't lose massive amounts of money. And we're thinking about doing that, and it'll be a form of a merger, but it'll remain the Postal Service, and I think it'll operate a lot better than it has been over the years. It's been just a tremendous loser for this country. Tremendous amounts of money are being lost, and we think we can do something that'll be very good.
And we're having some like Trump supporters in the chat, pushing back against this. And you're not pushing back against me, like you're typing as if you're pushing back against me. But I just played what Trump is putting forward, right? That this is, he is purporting to have the authority to do this, to undo legislation by executive fiat. And then there's and this proposal is not privatization, right? It's bringing it under the Commerce Department. But talking about privatization, which Howard Lutnick, the head of the Commerce Department, has proposed. Mark in the chat says privatization would take an amendment to the Constitution, which is a bill approved by 2/3 majority of the House, 2/3 majority of the Senate, 2/3 majority of the state. I don't even agree with that. And I know for certain that the Trump administration would not agree with that. The idea that would be the Constitution just says that we must have a postal service. It doesn't say that it has to be run by the government. I don't think. I don't know. Point me to. You can copy and paste in the chat the language in the Constitution about the Postal Service, but I don't know that that's true, and I certainly don't believe that Donald Trump would agree with that. Here is the reaction to this news about bringing the Postal Service under the Commerce Department from Mark Dimenstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union.
There are reports that the Trump administration will issue an executive order firing the entire Postal Board of Governors and placing the Postal Service under the control of the Commerce Department, a hostile takeover of the public Postal Service. If true, this is the most serious attack ever on all of us and the critical service we provide to the American people. Make no mistake, a hostile takeover move would not be about efficiency, saving the public money, or improving postal services. Just the opposite. It's the first step in destroying our national treasure, the public postal service. The Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, is a billionaire Wall Street banker who has openly advocated privatizing the Postal Service and turning it over to the private profit of his Wall Street friends. Any move to fire the Board of Governors would be illegal. An effort to remove postal executives would also be illegal. The law is clear. The President nominates members of the Postal Board of Governors, and the Senate confirms them. The Postal Board of Governors and the Board alone can hire and fire the Postmaster General. The Postal Service does not belong to one individual, including the President of the United States, or the Commerce Secretary, or billionaire Elon Musk. It belongs to the people of the country, the people we proudly serve every day. The Postal Reorganization Act of 1970 begins by saying, and by the way, that was the act that created the modern post office. It says, quote, "The United States Postal Service shall be operated as a basic and fundamental service provided to the people by the government of the United States, authorized by the Constitution, created by act of Congress, and supported by the people." End of quote. Postal workers went on strike in 1970, not just to win our collective bargaining rights, but to rid the post office of the political patronage and corruption that plagued the system at the time. Since then, we've grown to be the world's most efficient and wide-ranging postal service, a place where millions of people from every walk of life have been able to serve their country and earn a decent living. The Postal Service is there. We are there, no matter who the president is, no matter who leads Congress. We're there to serve the public. 167 million addresses, 6 and 7 days a week, 31,000 post offices in every community across the country.
There you go. The J-Tay in the chat says, both Canada and Britain have private post offices. We do better in the United States and lose less money doing it. Privatization is not the do-all answer. That's obviously right. And the idea about, high productivity jobs in the private sector versus low productivity jobs in the federal sector is just like it's baby brain stuff. It doesn't comport with the with reality. So there you go. Appreciate everybody tuning in. And yeah, we're going to continue to monitor this. I mean, really, really big news and very concerning news, obviously, that's happening with the Postal Service. Here to react to all of this, we have on the line Chris Pinnock, the Executive Vice President of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 9 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Chris, welcome to the program.
Yeah. Hi, Jacob. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. We're having this conversation with you today because letter carriers voted down the tentative agreement between the NALC and the USPS. Can you just, as we're going to be reacting to, getting your reaction to some of this news, but can you take a step back for us and remind us how that happened and why it happened?
Right. Well, it happened because letter carriers got organized. I don't know that this would have happened just on its own. Just about everybody knew that this tentative agreement was really bad, especially in the face of the historic inflation that we were experiencing. But I don't think that it would have happened without the reform movements, without Bill to Fighting NALC, with the concerned letter carriers, with the Mike Cariff campaign, and letter carriers across the country providing leadership on this issue. 55 branches across the country passed resolutions opposing the tentative agreement. We had parking lot rallies. We had photos that went all across social media. We had meetings. We had huge Zoom meetings. There were all kinds of discussions happening opposing what the national NALC was putting forward, and Brian Renfro, that we should accept this sellout agreement. And it was a historic vote. This was only the second time in 55 years that we voted down a tentative agreement. And I mean, the way the vote played out, 71% of letter carriers voted against this thing, and there were more people that voted no than voted in the entire last vote for the previous tentative agreement. So this is a really big deal.
Yeah, when I heard that, I think Tyler Vassar was on the Majority Report last week and mentioned how more people voted no than voted at all during the previous tentative agreement vote. I mean, that's, a really astounding, that's an astounding piece of information. I mean, that is just really, really wild. Definitely an increase in activity among the letter carriers.
41% increase in turnout. It was
How much?
63,000 last time and nearly 90,000 this time.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's huge, and like you said, that happened because postal workers, letter carriers, got organized. And why was the contract not acceptable to letter carriers?
Well, everybody talks about the pay, and the pay was just insulting, right? 1.3% per year, 3.9% over the life of the contract, and then it also didn't give us, the contract ended right before we would have gotten our next pay increase. We get our general wage increases usually in November, and it ended right before that. But the pay was really only part of it. The work rules are just terrible. They took away a significant amount of our fixed office time, which if you're not a letter carrier is, it's like, well, what does that mean? Basically, it means that there would be fewer letter carrier jobs throughout the country. And letter carriers right now are severely overworked in general. Here in Minneapolis, where I am, we have all kinds of mail that's going undelivered. And so we don't have enough people. And so this would reduce the number of letter carriers throughout the country. We gave up, another big give back was giving up the absolute right to not work more than 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. They said, oh, well, you can volunteer those rights away. We don't make enough money in this contract, but you can work unlimited overtime, and that's fine. And many of the other work rules, management throughout the country is abusing 16/7s, emergency placements, where they throw people off the clock. And we're seeing that more and more where they're doing it in non-emergency situations. The idea about the emergency placement is somebody gets into a fist fight, somebody's drunk and driving, or they're committing theft, they're stealing, some kind of egregious safety violation, some real bona fide emergency. Management can say, okay, we got to throw you off the clock, send you home. They're doing it for, somebody gets into a 5-mile-an-hour vehicle accident in the parking garage where, it's not, or another one was the parking garage just closes on a carrier's vehicle, the garage door. Somebody talks back to a manager. Another one is stationary events. In Minneapolis, we have 4 carriers that have been off the clock for, I'm not even sure, 50 days because management thought that they were taking breaks that were too long. And this tentative agreement tried to kind of deal with that and to say, oh, well, you can use your own vacation time, your annual leave, if you're thrown off the clock. And that's just insulting. I mean, it's not even a Band-Aid on it, because then it's like, oh, well, you have annual coming up, and then, what do you do when the grievance hasn't gone through? But yeah, so there's so many things on this tentative agreement that are unacceptable to letter carriers, that it was overwhelmingly rejected.
Wow. Yeah, and the idea about, being able to volunteer to work, unlimited overtime. I mean, at the very least, if you were going to give the post office that, it seems like you should also say in that exchange, look, if post office, if I'm going to give this to you, then we need to reduce the amount of overtime that we can refuse, right? If we can volunteer to work as much overtime as we want, we should be able to refuse to work any overtime if we want, right? Like that seems like to me that would be a fair kind of thing. But like you said, that did not happen in this in this agreement.
Right.
So
yeah, we don't think people should be forced to work any kind of mandatory overtime.
Exactly.
Right. And to say, well, oh, hey, you're only going to be able to be forced 4 hours of overtime every day, and then you can go home. And we already have that right anyway. It says it's an absolute right, and we tell people just go home at 12 hours. The NLRB has upheld that they can't fire you for going home at 12 hours.
Right. So the union and the Postal Service are heading into arbitration now. How did that happen? You know, after you voted down the agreement, and then you had this negotiation period. Now you're heading into arbitration. Why are you going into arbitration, and what happens now in arbitration?
Right. So we don't have the legal right to strike. And so with the way that our contract is set up, that's really the only option when a tentative agreement is voted down. That's what happens. I mean, they get this 15-day negotiating period that just ended to try to see if they can come up with another tentative agreement. And I guess that's at least one positive thing, is that we were able to tell people, well, it's not like it's going to be another 500 days of endless negotiating. You know, it's 15 days and then that's it. Then it goes to arbitration. I don't really like that. I think arbitration is very friendly to management. You know, these arbitrators, it's not like they're retired letter carriers or carpenters or painters. You know, these are retired lawyers in general, or, you know, or active lawyers. They're people that are friendly to management, to the status quo. And I know that maybe there are some retired letter carriers that are on, like, you know, regional arbitration panels and stuff like that. But, you know, for the most part, I don't think that letter carriers are going to get what they need from arbitration. Now, it's better than just taking this awful tentative agreement that management tried to shove down our throats. But that's something that I think that letter carriers have to understand, is that I think we can do better than arbitration. Our national president, Brian Renfro, will say, when this is brought up about the right to strike, that we should fight for that, he'll say, oh, well, look at the coal miners that were unsuccessfully striking. They'd love to have interest arbitration, you know, rather than the ability to strike. And I don't agree with that at all. The right to strike, I mean, that is our ultimate power as workers, right, is withdrawing our labor. And I think that if you look across the history of the labor movement, and even just the last couple years, like the longshoremen got massive raises with a short strike. And, you know, strikes are not always successful. But I think our chances would have been much better had we said, you know, okay, you're going to offer us 1.3% per year. Well, we're going to go on strike. Now, you know, we're not at that point right now. And we do have to grapple with the fact that it's illegal. But that's why I think we should go on a campaign to fight for the right to strike.
And so, being that the situation is what it is right now and you're going into arbitration, how can letter carriers and how are some letter carriers proposing that the union and city carriers across the country can affect the outcome of arbitration?
Right. Well, we invite people to get active in the labor movement, in the NALC, in reforming and transforming our union. There's nothing better that you can do with your life than stick up for your fellow coworkers. And I think that this is a great time to be active in politics. You know, when you look across the landscape, political landscape, the labor movement, you can see that the low point of labor resistance is behind us. Working people are fighting back. And so I just encourage people, with kind of all of the bad news that's coming out, to see the activism and invite you to get involved with that. I do want to plug, if I could, the Build a Fighting NALC website. It's fightingnalc.com. You know, we're trying to help bring more people into the fight. You know, we have public Zoom meetings. We're organizing local chapters of BFN to try to build power throughout the country. But back to the question of what can we do to affect the outcome of arbitration? We're pushing for March 23rd to be a national day of action, to have public rallies in support of our tentative agreement. And also now, with everything coming out about the Trump administration trying to take over the post office, that can also be some of the messaging, is to defend the post office, defend other federal workers. And the reason for March 23rd is that originally the Mike Cariff campaign, one of the people running for NALC national president in 2026, he had plans to do a march in Washington, D.C. from NALC headquarters to USPS headquarters. Now, we just got word that National is going to do that march, which I think is a good thing. This is what we wanted from National to do actions and get in the fight. And so that's great, but not so great news is that they said, oh, well, we decided that we don't want to do it on a Sunday when nobody will be at USPS headquarters to hear us or see us. So we're going to do it on 2 days later on a Tuesday. And presumably they're going to do it in the middle of the day when letter carriers can't be there and they're not harnessing the power of collective action, which is kind of typical Brian Renfro, to do these kinds of actions in the middle of a day on a work day, rather than inviting, carriers from all over the East Coast could have come to that. If you'd done it on a Sunday, it could have been a huge thing. And it's not that the staffers in USPS headquarters are the audience. The audience is the country, right? The media that's there. We don't need these USPS staffers to come down and hear our chants and speeches, right? We need the media to see that. And so, but we're still going to do the National Day of Action on March 23rd. And so I'd invite carriers all across the country to try to organize actions where you are. We're going to do one in Minneapolis. Tyler's looking at getting permits at the state capitol in St. Paul. And we're going to invite every large branch, any letter carrier in Minneapolis to come and join us, and our brothers and sisters in the other postal unions, the APWU, and anybody in the labor movement that wants to come support us.
So originally,
I think that's the path forward.
Yeah, so originally the plan was a march in D.C. on March 23rd, and now the NALC has moved that date, and it basically took the idea of a march, but said we're going to move that date. And so the reaction from folks outside of National has been to retain March 23rd as the date, but to say this is going to be a National Day of Action. We're going to have local rallies and events and stuff like that. Still on March 23rd, when working letter carriers and postal workers can come and attend and show out. And then National is going to do their thing with, presumably a little decreased turnout, but hopefully as much as possible.
National is not calling for that. That's something that Building a Fighting NALC is pushing for. They just took over the march and moved it to the 25th. And so we're just saying we need to piggyback off of that. We need to have a National Day of Action. Unfortunately, our national leadership they don't understand the power of collective action. And so we just said, we want to do our action on that date. And, several other branches throughout the country are running with March 23rd. And we want to encourage other folks from throughout the country to hop on for that date.
And so, the immediate reaction to that from some maybe skeptics of this kind of idea about the mobilization stuff is going to be, why would an arbitrator care about letter carriers or supporters doing things like this? Can you walk us through your thoughts on that, on why will these actions affect how an arbitrator ultimately decides?
Right. Yeah, that's a question that comes up. Well, why do rallies? And I've had some conversations with MBAs, national business agents, where they'll say, well, what is that going to do? We're the ones that negotiate the contract behind closed doors. And I just totally disagree with that. If we do this National Day of Action, that will get on the radar of the arbitrator, of management, and send them the message that this tentative agreement is not enough. We want to hear from the letter carriers in Brooklyn, Staten Island that have installed a shower in their union hall because they have homeless letter carriers. We want to hear from San Francisco, where people are homeless out there as well, or they have to live 2 hours away to find affordable housing. We want to hear from the Minnesota and Michigan letter carriers that have to work through, -20, -30 wind chill, walking through the snow, from the carriers in Las Vegas and Florida that are working in vehicles in these LLVs that sometimes get up to 130 degrees. And telling our story like that and working together in collective action is very powerful. And it's reminiscent of the strike. And these bosses are afraid of us, right? They are afraid of us withdrawing our labor. And so us getting organized and getting militant, and not that I'm saying that we should go on strike, but it's something that they are afraid of and that they will take note of.
Right. So moving from the contract negotiations and arbitration into some of the other general Postal Service news, folks, we're on the line with Chris Pinnock, National Association of Letter Carriers Branch 9 Executive Vice President. That's the union for city carriers. We've been discussing news about the contract between the letter carriers and the Postal Service. Like I said earlier last week, Louis Dejoy announced that he is going to be resigning as Postmaster General, as leader of the Postal Service. What is your reaction to Dejoy's resignation?
It was oddly ambivalent when I heard about it. If you had told me any time over the last 5 years, Dejoy is resigning, I'd have been overjoyed. I don't know that this Postmaster General has done anything good for letter carriers or for the Postal Service. But in this context, and Dejoy, he's been awful for us, right? He threw the 2020 election into chaos by saying no more overtime is going to be approved when we're in the middle of a pandemic, when we have all kinds of workers that are out, when we're delivering 30+% of the time on overtime. The sorting and delivery centers have been a disaster. His Delivery for America plan is terrible for the service. All kinds of slowdowns. The mail service in Atlanta, where they have this system, is horrible. And even Republican senators, he's getting lit up every time he goes to Capitol Hill, and by Republicans as well, talking about how bad the service is. And so, I guess he's gotten, his brand is kind of toxic on Capitol Hill. So it's not especially surprising to me. But I think that he was almost assuredly forced out by Trump. And I'm sure Trump will put in, some kind of Doge czar to try to Dogify the Postal Service. And that will just be a disaster for us. If they try to privatize, we can look to Europe to see what that's done, and it's been terrible. It's been terrible for the public. It's been terrible for the customers, for the working conditions, for the carriers. The price of postage has gone way up in places that have done this. The delivery has suffered. They've reduced the number of days that they get delivery. Post offices have been closed, and they use it to just suck money out of this public service and into the pockets of his billionaire buddies.
Right. Yeah, that's been the reaction that I've gotten from letter carriers that have been reaching out to me. It was basically exactly like you said. Anytime over the last 5 years, I would have been ecstatic, but now I'm worried that because like them and like you, I can't imagine Trump putting in somebody that's going to be better for the Postal Service, better for postal workers, and better for postal consumers than Dejoy, right. Frankly. As bad as Dejoy is, I can't imagine it getting better. I can only see it getting worse, given the first month of the Trump administration.
Well, and it's funny, one more thing on Dejoy. If you listen to some of these hearings where he goes to, Senate hearings, and you listen to him go back and forth with Rand Paul, and Rand Paul just rips him a new one saying,
yep.
The costs are spiraling out of control. Why are you hiring all of these full-time career positions because they started hiring more part-time flexibles, which is a career position for letter carriers that have, basically the same benefits that full-timers do, rather than the non-career position of the CCA. And Rand Paul is ripping him, saying, you need to hire more contractors.
Yep.
You need to hire more non-career people, and saying, talking all about our retirement costs, our health insurance costs, all our benefits. Just basically saying you need to attack the living conditions of your employees and pay them a lot less. And it's funny to see this Trump mega donor defend, oh no, actually, we've needed to do this because we couldn't hire people. And it's like, so you can see it could be even worse.
Yeah, thinking back on those hearings with Dejoy in it, it really is. I mean, you can definitely tell that he is a relic of the first administration, because his response to Rand Paul is like, it's not as if he wouldn't love to do privatization or hiring more contractor non-career people, but he is like, one of the things that he was saying was like, look, I'm operating under constraints. If you want to change the law, if you want to do, Congress is what creates the constraints under which I am working. If you want to change it, I'm all for it. But right now I'm working under the constraints that I have, and I'm, doing the best that I can, and blah, blah, blah. And these are the options that are available to me. And that is the attitude of many in the previous Trump administration, a reluctant sort of respect for constraints and the rule of law and checks and balances and things like that. But, this administration is just totally throwing all of that out the window and, acting like Trump is a king. And so, yeah, very, very concerning. And so that brings us to the last bit of postal news, which is the Washington Post reported that Donald Trump is flirting with the idea of bringing the Postal Service into the Department of Commerce. And for folks who this is all kind of in the weeds and everything, but the Postal Service is a federal corporation. It's not a private entity exactly, although it is subject to the National Labor Relations Act, which is the private sector, labor relations regime. But it is not funded by taxpayer dollars. It is funded by the people who use its services, right? And so it is a private kind of separate. It's not private, but it is a separate, independent federal corporation. And so the proposal on the table, it seems right now, is not privatization, and actually just by on the kind of structurally what it would be doing, it seems like it's taking it like further away from privatization, because it would put it directly within the Commerce Department and under the control of the government even more so than it is right now. But obviously the concern is that this would be kind of de facto privatization, or at least some of the concern that Dimenstein and Renfro are putting out there is that this would basically be de facto privatization because of Letnick leading the Commerce Department, a billionaire who's called for the privatization of the Postal Service. And so, what is your reaction to that proposal, to Donald Trump's refusal to deny it? And, what kind of effect do you think that would have if it happens?
Right. Yeah, I think maybe you played a little bit of this clip, but initially the White House denied that they were considering this executive order of bringing the Postal Service into the Commerce Department. But then PBS reported last night that Trump admitted that he was considering it. And, we know that they've been thinking about this because they were talking about this stuff the last time that he was in power. But yeah, I mean, even if it's not, we don't know exactly what it would look like if it's moved into the Commerce Department, if Trump has his way with the Postal Service. And some conversations with coworkers will say, well, maybe it would be a good thing because there's a lot of problems in the Postal Service, and somebody needs to come in here and fix them, and we've got too many supervisors and managers and rubber band counters up on the 4th floor and stuff like that. And that's not what they're talking about. They put out this thin justification that, oh, well, we think we can make the Postal Service more efficient. But you look at their actions, I mean, firing the people that are in charge of the nuclear stockpile, and then saying, "Oh, actually, we didn't realize how important that was. We'll try to rehire them 2 days later." They're not this is going to be a tax on Postal Service workers. That's what it's going to be. I mean, when you look at the reports that like the OIG puts out about what do we need to do to get costs under control, it's overtime. It's workers' comp benefits, and it's attendance, sick leave use. And so they would attack all those things. Already, I just read an article talking about that they want to go after union time, where stewards are on the clock filing grievances. And they're talking about that not just for the NALC and letter carriers and the Postal Service, but across the federal workforce. And that is such a huge deal. If they were able to change it so that the unions would have to pay stewards and grievance handlers, it would decimate our grievance process. It would make it so that the only thing that we could grieve would be discipline, maybe really big money cases, maybe like overtime equitability, but like the quality of life things. I mean, we file so many grievances that make it tolerable to work under, these tyrants, these postal managers. And that's something where a lot of private sector unions operate under that, where they can only file a few grievances because they just couldn't afford to do it. I mean, I'm sure they've already talked about taking away the universal service obligation, where we have to deliver to, out in the rural areas. And that would have a huge impact on people living away from the cities. I mean, you can just imagine all kinds of attacks, right? I mean, they look at the Postal Service and they say, here's this vast empire of real estate and this huge workforce, this huge company, and we're not making any profit off of it. How can we change that, right? I mean, it would be a tax on us. It would be a tax on service. Anything they could to suck out money out of the system. We know, I mean, for years and years, the Postal Service management has been wanting to sell off the buildings, the post offices. There's some 30,000 post offices throughout the country. Dejoy has gone on an offensive on that, trying to sell off buildings. And I mean, it would just be an absolute disaster. And yeah, you talk about the stockbroker billionaire Howard Lutnick being put in control. This is not a friend of labor. This would not be good for the public. This is somebody that is only looking out for himself and, his billionaire buddies. And so I think we should oppose this, with everything we've got.
Right. And just to make it explicit, the problem is basically with it being under the Commerce Department is that these people are going to have more control and are likely to degrade service, make working conditions worse. And on the union time stuff, people raise their hackles about the idea that we should be able, as government union representatives, to be able to, on agency time, file grievances and represent our workers. But that is not unique to the public sector. Most private sector union contracts allow for that sort of stuff. And in fact, a lot of private sector contracts allow for much more lenient union time provisions than the public sector. And the idea there is that it is the agency's responsibility to abide by the law and the contract. And so if we as workers are forced to bring the company to heel, we should not have to foot that bill. It should be the company, the agency that is in violation of the law and the contract that has to foot that bill. And so that's
right. If they followed the contract, they wouldn't have to pay any union time.
Right. Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. And so As we're wrapping up, folks, we're going to go ahead and open the phone lines. 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857 is the phone number. We'll take calls very, very quickly after we take a break here, because we got to make sure that we get to Boss Watch, but we'll also take calls in the second half of the program. So get that phone number ready if you'd like to call in, particularly interested in hearing from letter carriers about how you're reacting to all of this news. But as we wrap up with you, Chris, I guess what are your thoughts on how federal workers and postal workers, letter carriers, and all of us in the public sector, in the federal public sector, how can we and how should we respond to these attacks on our livelihoods and on the services that we provide the American people?
Right. I think we need to have public rallies against these things, and we need to oppose what they're doing and, join each other in solidarity. One thing that it reminded me of was the protests against what Dejoy was doing in the lead up to the 2020 election. There were all kinds of protests all throughout the country against what people perceived to be attacks on the process of running the election and all the mail-in votes. And apparently Trump is still angry at Dejoy. That's probably maybe a small part of his anger, is that he still blames him for losing the 2020 election through mail-in votes. Right. But there were all kinds. I was just reading an article to remind myself there were protests at Dejoy's personal residence, and not that I'm necessarily advocating for that. I think it's better to kind of have them in the public square. But these protests sprung up. I think maybe the APWU had a hand in those, but the NALC didn't do anything on a national level as far as encouraging these protests, and that was a huge deal. The public will support us if we provide some leadership and bring people out, and tell them what they can do. And so I just think that they are afraid of the public, and of them getting on our side. And, postal workers, letter carriers, we should work in concert with other federal workers to, defend each other. And I think that these actions on March 23rd, they should be not just about our tentative agreement and letter carriers, but also about defending federal workers in general.
Yep. Chris Pinnock, Executive Vice President for NALC Branch 9 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you for everything you do. It was a pleasure.
Yep. We're going to take a break really quick. We'll take a couple of calls really quick. You got to be quick. A couple calls on the other side of the break, and then some more in the second half of the show. So stay tuned, folks. 844-899-TVLR is the number. We'll be right back. The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the South, on the radio in Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Louisiana. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. If you have anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. We'll take a couple of calls here. Make sure you state your thoughts pretty quickly, like 3 minutes tops. Here's a caller from a 317 area code. 317 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Jimmy. I'm from Indiana.
Jimmy from Indiana. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I just want to say that everything that's been said was absolutely correct. I think we should get out there and fight. I don't know if I can make the march rally just because of the expense, and I don't know if my union, local union, would support it. But we really need to get in front of this e-commerce thing, with Trump and stuff. I don't care about politics too much in the national side if you supported whoever you wanted to support. But this is a threat to our jobs, to the service of our customers, which has already gone down the drain. We were at 98% accuracy before these STCs. We're at 78% accuracy. And that has nothing to do with the letter carrier. You know what I mean? So we have to be, we are the front line. We are the Marines of the Postal Service. We have to be able to support and stand up for our brothers and sisters, no matter what, craft you're in, and federal workers too. Like, this is ridiculous. If we're one of the largest sectors of the federal government, and if they start making cuts to us, they're going to be in serious trouble. They're going to be in hot water, because our customers are going to lose service, and you're going to have really angry postal workers. Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Gotcha.
Jimmy from Indiana, thank you for your call. I appreciate it. Definitely recommend...
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. But definitely recommend reaching out to your local union about having a march. And if your local union isn't doing anything, maybe reach out to your local labor council. Look up, the Indiana AFL-CIO should have a list of local labor councils. Labor councils are the regional federation of unions in the area, and your labor council might be willing to put on some sort of event for you. So reach out, try to get your union to do something. If they don't want to do something, try to reach out to your labor council, see if they'll do something. Caller from a 763 area code. Caller from a 763 area code. You're on the air. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Lauren. I'm from Minneapolis.
Lauren from Minneapolis. What's on your mind?
I'm concerned about, frustrated because they say they don't have money to pay the carriers, but we have all this bloat in management. And to give an example, Minneapolis created this safety team that's downtown. Then they drive to the suburbs to check on carriers to see if they have the right shoes on. And and these people are taking 2 hours to check on a single carrier. That's $90 right there to have a 2-minute conversation with me saying, hey, doing a great job. And then they leave. But then they're claiming they're so concerned about safety. Yep. But the other morning they're telling me to get out to my walking route in -31 wind chill. They're concerned about safety. They're pushing our start times back and putting us into the dark, or they're pushing our start times back and pushing us further into the heat in the summer. And so I just think it's all bullshit, the stuff that they are saying they're concerned about and creating teams for.
Yep. Exactly right. Lauren in Minneapolis, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the call. Just a reminder, folks, we are on the radio, so make sure you remember that. We do have a couple of other callers on the line. We'll get to the other callers on the line here in about 15 minutes. We got to make sure that we get to Boss Watch. Boss Watch is a sponsored segment, folks. We gotta get to that. So we're gonna do Boss Watch here. Then we'll go into the second half of the program and we'll take some more calls. So hang on, and we'll be with you momentarily. Boss Watch is a segment that we do every single week where we take a look at what bosses are up to, particularly in the American South and the American colonies, but not exclusively. As I've been saying for the past month, the way that we have been doing Boss Watch is we have been checking federal agencies that are tasked with enforcing worker protection laws, checking their press releases and things like that. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the Department of Labor, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, all of those things. And since Trump has been inaugurated, none of these agencies have announced any new enforcement actions. And so I guess bosses are just behaving super great, even though for the last 4 years, at least 3 to 8 bosses just in the South every single week were found to have been stealing from their workers, were found to have put their employees in unsafe working conditions illegally, all of that. Bosses are just on their best behavior now, if we are to believe the Trump administration, because there's been no new enforcement actions. But there have been some news. One of those is in Texas, where a worker at a Tesla plant died this summer. OSHA investigated it because obviously he died before Trump came into office, and so that was back a long time ago when the federal government cared about worker deaths. That was investigated, but the investigation did not conclude until late January. That investigation has now concluded, but OSHA is not releasing its findings to the public, which is what they normally do. Normally, if you go back and TVLR.fm, you can find our Boss Watch segments for, the last several years. And you will see, after every one of these investigations concludes, OSHA puts out, here's what happened. They're not doing that here with Tesla. So Representative Kassar in Texas, who represents the district that this facility is in, is calling on OSHA to release its findings to the public, because he says that if OSHA does not release its findings to the public, then that gives at least the appearance that Tesla is getting preferential treatment. And then in Union Busters, this segment of Boss Watch, Union Busters covering national updates, is sponsored by Labor Lab. Labor Lab is an employer watchdog organization. They are committed to safeguarding the right to organize through unions, collective bargaining, and mutual aid. They do this by combing through reports that Union Busters are required to file with the Department of Labor. Here are the new LM20s. These are the forms that Union Busters have to file with the Department of Labor. Here are the new LM20s that were filed last week. Empire Auto Parts in Totowa, New Jersey, hired Quest Consulting for $300 to $450 an hour per consultant. The election was lost by the union, 24 to 59. Vestas American Technology in Bad Axe, Michigan, hired LRI Consulting for $425 an hour. That union election is still open, still pending the results, has not happened yet. Confluence Health for Wenatchee Regional Eye Center in Wenatchee, Washington, hired LRI Consulting for $425 an hour. That election is still ongoing. Evergy in Burlington, Kansas, hired LRI Consulting for $425 an hour. There is no NLRB case open there right now. McAllister Oil in Wellington, Kansas, hired GRCA. They did not disclose their compensation. The union lost the election 3-9. Meats by Lens in Hammond, Indiana, hired CACR Labor Education Services. They did not disclose their compensation. The election was 10-9 in favor of unionization, but the challenges were determinative, and so there is no official results right now. There was there was at least one challenged ballot, which means that that challenged ballot is determinative, and so the NLRB is going to have to investigate and see if that voter was eligible or not. In amended LM20s, LRI Consulting amended their LM20 for Blue Oval SK in Glendale, Kentucky, where the UAW has a huge election, very consequential. LRI Consulting added subcontractors whose compensation rate is $425 an hour. Just an inordinate amount of money being spent on these union busters to dissuade workers from exercising their federally protected right to organize a union, their constitutional right to associate with their fellow workers. Really, really gross stuff. There's going to be some more updates that we include in Boss Watch in the newsletter, so make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter so that you can get those other updates. The other one that we're going to be taking a look at is a Washington Post article taking a look at a Phoenix City, Alabama lumber mill. The title of the Washington Post article is, "It was the deadliest workplace in America, so why didn't safety regulators shut it down?" At Phoenix Lumber Company, this is from the piece, workers had lost fingers, broken bones, and been mangled by machines. At least 28 employees reported injuries since 2010 at a company with only 50 people on the payroll at a time. 3 workers have died, and a medical examiner's report detailed how just 23 pounds of one employee was recovered after he was caught in a machine. Jesus. I mean, did you hear that, folks? A medical examiner's report detailed how just 23 pounds of a person, that was all that could be recovered after he was caught in a machine. It had reached the point, some former workers said, that they would pray before the start of their $9 an hour shifts. So we'll be including some more excerpts and pointing to that article in the newsletter as well. So tvlr.fm/contact is where you can subscribe to those newsletters. Adam, do we have any plugs that you wanted to get to before we wrap the first half of the show?
Hey, real quickly, go to labornotes.org/events to check out some of their trainings they have online over the next month or so. They have a stewards workshop for this month, which is assertive grievance handling on February 24th. They also have a workshop on March 11th, which might be relevant for some letter carriers, from what I hear. What to do when your union breaks your heart. So again, that's March 11th. And the March Stewards Workshop is going to be on investigating grievances. So you can go to labornotes.org/events to learn more about those and to register. Also wanted to mention a couple of local events. Alabama Arise has its legislative day on March 20th. You can go to alarise.org to find out more about that. And Alabama Arise and the North Alabama Area Labor Council are going to be partnering for a legislative advocacy training here in Huntsville. It's going to be at the NALC Hall here in Huntsville Sunday, March 9th, that afternoon. So again, you can go to alarise.org to find out more, to RSVP for the event. We'd love to have you. And the Labor Council is partnering with the Huntsville Historical Society on a screening of Norma Ray on March 22nd. So really excited about that.
That's going to be it for us today, folks. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We got a whole second half of the program lined up, so stay tuned. Find us on Facebook and YouTube. If you don't do that, then we'll see you next week. Our 844-899-8857. If you'd like to give us a call, you can go ahead and do that and get in line. We'll take calls right as we start the first half of the program. And then we're going to be talking to Eric Blanc about organizing under Trump. Really excited for that conversation. So stay tuned. We're going to be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
This is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio program and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you'd like to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-TVLR. We do have some callers on the line right now, presumably talking about the stuff, the Postal Service stuff. So we'll go ahead and get to those calls before we bring Eric on the line. This caller from a 347 area code. Caller from a 347 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
How you doing? My name is Steven. I'm a member of Branch 41, Brooklyn, Staten Island Merge. Can you hear me?
Steven from Branch 41. I can hear you. What's on your mind?
Okay, great. I want to thank both yourself and Adam for helping to open up some eyes and ears with the NALC. I'm calling in because you had Mike Kareff on a week or so ago, and you had asked him a question concerning locality pay. Where currently Alaska and Hawaii get a 25% TPOLA, and he explained the process a bit of how these come up at resolutions at our convention. And just to kind of explain to you, each branch is entitled to one delegate for every 20 members. So Brooklyn, Staten Island, we have a little more than 2,000, but let's round it to 2,000. So that means you're entitled to 100 delegates. However, the cost involved of getting to that convention, just like our brother for Indianapolis mentioned, so we don't get 100 people to show up. Our bylaws allow currently 35 paid delegates, and sometimes you don't even get the paid delegates because you got to burn up your own vacation time. So it's not like you're voting for proxy. It's not like if 20 people show up, then they're entitled to the prorated amount of people they represent. Right. So that was something. And when I was really struck, though, at that convention, I watched The Great Strike. It's a documentary of the Great Strike of 1970. And one thing that really got me, they showed you a map. Of course, Branch 36 going out first, 41 up in the Northeast, Minneapolis. In the Midwest, I believe it was Milwaukee and Denver, and then we had the West Coast. And most of the other people in the room were people older than me, retired. But what I really noticed, and you even alluded to that fact, the Southeast, Midwest, and the Southwest were noticeably not really being indicated that they went out. So it was referred to as collective begging previously, and then we got collective bargaining. However, in the NALC, we still have collective begging, and that's members like myself that live in these high-cost areas, but it constantly gets voted down. And it's, in essence, a carrier pay should be the same across the country. Well, our base pay is the same, but in order to get locality pay, that would be, I think it's presently for the AFGE, I don't know if it's 3,000 to 5,000, because all your other federal workplaces do receive a locality pay. I had previously applied for customs, and they explained, well, there's at the time, I think it was like 3,000. And that's just something that we are still collectively begging. Now, when that resolution came up for a vote, what really surprised me was another New York City branch, which will go unnamed, all of their delegates stayed sitting down. And I got out of my seat and I went up there and says, hey, I know that's your boy up on the dais because their president happens to be on the national board. I says, but you represent your rank and file brothers and sisters back there. Do you go back and tell them that, are they all under rent control? Their rent is that low? And that was something like, whose interest do we represent? When you show up at these things, your loyalty is to your rank and file members that put you in those seats, not to the leadership. Loyalty is to your brother and sister, their sweat equity and the dues money that they pay. And that's what you stand up and fight for. So to me, that was very disappointing because that very same branch that was Vinny's branch. And I think he would be a little bit disappointed if he was at the forefront. And when it came to sticking up for your members, the people at that convention stayed sitting down. You know, and a quick thing on this going to arbitration. I'm just
really quick,
wondering to myself.
Yeah, really quick. We need to
Okay,
wrap
here
it up.
it goes.
So this will be the final point, and then we'll
we've
get to
voted
another
it down, but now as it goes to arbitration, who tells the NALC lawyers what to fight for? So hopefully all that transparency and translucency and opaqueness, you know, I just hope the right thing gets done. And I want to thank you for your time. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Thanks, Stephen, Branch 41. Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in. Thanks for tuning in. Another caller. This one from a 256 area code. Caller from a 256 area code. What's on your mind? Where are you calling from? And what's your name? What's your calling?
Well,
where are you calling from?
This is Dwayne. This is Dwayne. I was the one that told you about the Alabama solution with Stacey George.
Yeah. Dwayne from Alabama. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm wanting to propose something to you guys. I'm calling it influence through shared interest as far as protesting things. Have you got me? This would mean something like mail carriers, labor, those affected by the upcoming Alabama solution, which it will affect people when they see it, and the veterans all coming together, because it will be kind of a common cause against what's happening to us all. Are you following me there, Adam? Jacob? And I wanted to tell you, the veterans are gathering at the State House for a peaceful protest this Tuesday, February the 25th, over the disdain of KIV in the legislature usurping the voices of the veterans by creating a department where they will no longer have a voice. And she may be doing this because of the conflict she had with Admiral Kent Davis earlier more than anything.
Yeah, Dwayne, just to explain for people, just to explain for people what you're talking about here, the Alabama Department of Veteran Affairs, KIV has proposed a major restructuring that veterans groups are upset about. I haven't, frankly, followed this very closely, but the general outlines and contours of the discussion, as I understand it, is that basically her restructuring proposal would give her more authority over the Department of Veteran Affairs and basically, like you're saying, less input from veterans. And you're saying that veterans are going to be going down there next week to protest this this proposal?
Yes, they will be going on Tuesday at 11:30 to the State House. There will be speakers. And what I wanted to tell you as far as what I was talking about, influence through shared interest, I looked it up. There were only 18% of the people that voted in the last election. Veterans themselves would make a 7.4% difference. If you add to this, there are a lot of media outlets that don't like what's happening with the veterans and these other areas. So if you add all this together and you put postal workers, those persons upset, like I said, and the labor movement as a part of shared interest, we become a really good voting bloc. That in Alabama, we may not have a lot of difference when it comes to governor and bigger things in Alabama, but a vote in the Republican primary can weaken anyone that we didn't like as a candidate, or make an actual candidate that we might like. Let's say Stacey runs the next time, which I don't know that he would. This would be something that makes a huge difference, and we actually stand a chance of having elected officials that we more prefer to be in office. So you kind of follow me there?
Yeah, just basically, the proposing more people voting in the Republican primary as opposed to the Democratic primary, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, I've done that before in certain elections where there's particularly little.
Well, that way, if you had someone that you were really juxtaposed to,
right,
that would not be the person. And since the Republican Party allows this, and we hardly ever have a Democrat that gets anywhere in the November election. And we do have what is occurring right now because of the actions that are taking place in our government that would allow us, if we, like I said, influence through shared interests of those who are in the positions that we are right now, guys.
All right, appreciate the call,
and
Dwayne.
I appreciate you letting me get on here to tell about it. And great show, and thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And one thing I'll just add to that is, I mean, that's something that a lot of Alabama voters are discussing, you know, what will happen in 2026, because the elections here have just not been competitive across the board for state legislature, governor, all the way down to like county school board, city council. By and large, the elections are not very competitive. I do think there's lots of opportunity to build working class coalitions that can, reshape the political future of Alabama. It's, I think, going to be a lot of conversations to be had over the next year over, approaches. There are people trying to run in all kinds of different parties, obviously. But bottom line is we do have to have more unity among working class folks to make sure that we're getting our voices heard, because that is not happening in Alabama. That's for sure.
Caller from an 803 area code. 803 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Andrew calling out of South Carolina.
Andrew from South Carolina. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just got some information regarding the arbitration for NALC that it should possibly be coming out by next Saturday, because both NALC and USPS has both banded together to get it pushed out as soon as possible.
Wow. That would be, so you're saying that you think that the arbitration will begin next week, or it will end next week?
Yes, they were in a meeting up until 10:30 p.m. last night, and both parties have agreed to get the arbitration done as quick as possible.
Wow. All right. Well, there you go. Appreciate
it. And this is just as a result of just trying to get the focus towards what's really mattering right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great update. Appreciate it, and hope you're right. And yeah, hopefully they can get in and do the arbitration and get a good contract and wrap it up quick. Because yeah, there's lots of things in flux that would obviously affect the arbitration if the arbitration doesn't conclude before that. So, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. If you want to get where he was, you can give us a call, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. This caller from a 617 area code. 617 area code, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is John Murphy. I'm down here in Naples, Florida. I'm a city letter carrier out of branch 4716. I just want to highlight two things to the listeners that are currently listening and future listeners. March 23rd is a month away, but we need every branch to hop on board with this. You could organize a rally around the title of Save Our Services, reach out to the APW and mail handlers, bring them in. Letter carriers should be sending an email or a voice call to their branch leadership asking them to endorse it. Hopefully by now, a lot of branches are actually woken up by the threat of privatization and the fact that Renfro sold us out. If your branch is not on board, you individually need to step up in your office. You need to go around and hear and listen to what our brothers and sisters are saying in between our cases and ask them if they will join you in a rally. Even if it's Sunday with just three of you in a parking lot outside the post office, that is something. That is taking a stand. And we need to have this all across the country. There's 3,000 branches inside the NALC. So don't feel defeated if your branch is against you. Just keep moving forward. And I want to bring this forward because the Teamsters, a couple of years ago, Hoffa shoved down a contract down their throats. The Teamsters voted it down by a large number, and Hoffa turned around and said, no, we're accepting this. And the Teamsters rank and file organized They organized with the Reform Caucus, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, and they went to the convention the following year and got that wording out of their constitution.
Yep.
So change is possible. Renfro's going to go, and the rank and file need to realize it's our union. It's not the people in the suits and ties at the top and national level or even in our branch level. We are the union. So we all need to own our union. And for all the letter carriers listening, please get active on a local level. You don't have to attend your union meeting. The shop floor is where the struggle is. That is our union. Talk to your coworkers, talk to your CCAs and the PTFs who are probably shitting their fucking pants right now because they might, am I live? Sorry. I don't know if they're concerned that they're going to get laid off, but we need to reach out to them. They're our brothers and sisters. An injury to one is injury to all. Ask them to get organized. Organize a rally March 23rd. If anyone needs help organizing a rally, reach out to me. I did one down in Naples, Florida, even when my branch president sent out an email telling people not to attend. We had 1 out of 4 union members out of our branch attend.
Wow.
My email is nextgenerationcarriers@gmail.com. This is Naples, Florida, one of the most red areas in the country. And we had the news media show up. It is possible to get our names out there. And it is vital that we take a stand. And it's not just the city letter carriers, it's the entire postal service.
Yep.
So I'll end it with that.
Florida,
and then also, if
appreciate
anyone wants a good document. Okay, cool. You guys have a good night.
Yeah, appreciate it. nextgenerationcarriers@gmail.com sounds like the either. Well, I think he's in the YouTube chat right now. I think it's nextgenerationcarriers@gmail.com. So you can reach out to him if you want help. Also, obviously, you could reach out to Build a Fighting in ALC, et cetera, et cetera. But that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really impressive.
Yeah.
And yeah, Naples, Florida, that's not necessarily the easiest environment to do that kind of organizing. So good work. Appreciate the report.
Final caller, and then we'll be talking to Eric Blanc. Really excited for that conversation. This caller is from a 715 area code. 715 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is Nick, and I'm in Minnesota.
Nick from Minnesota. What's on your mind?
All right, is everybody cool? Is everybody good? And, don't treat me like a 204B. I'm not a 204B either. I don't speak on the behalf of the Postal Service. These are my thoughts and opinion as well. Just kind of floating this out there that nobody really talks about, and I've heard this in the past before. I have an all-mounted route, and, if we want to save costs at the Postal Service, eliminating walking routes should be on the table. I know it's not popular for walking city carriers, but mounted routes, including mine, we do maybe 300 more people. We have, 100 more packages. We have more flats. We have more letters. I mean, we have less letters. We have less flats, but we do have more packages. And you could absorb a lot of the ox routes, and have more. We're just kind of getting honest with ourselves of how to save some money and start looking at, the writing on the wall, absorbing, walking routes into all mounted wouldn't be a bad idea.
What's a mounted route?
Money.
Can you
it's more
explain it?
efficient and you get more done.
Can you explain
a
mounted route?
Yeah, a mounted route is just yeah, certainly. Mounted route is just a classification for all driving. And, I've seen the argument saying, well, what are you going to do, when you have the 90-year-old on your route, that has trouble getting to the mailbox? Well, they file for a thing called a hardship. And then now the mounted carrier on a mounted route then walks to their door to, deliver the mail. And I have almost 900 people on my all mounted route. And it was actually tipping at 1,100, but it's got an adjustment. So anyway, I've had, maybe 10 hardships. It's not that common to get out, for hardships. There's plenty of elderly on my route too. I mean, just kind of getting that out there. And
so
yeah, I just wanted to kind of float that out to everyone. I know it's going to get it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And so what would it mean then for a walking route? And like I've been covering, I've been covering some of the carrier stuff, but obviously the deeper we go into the stuff, the less visibility that I have on these specific issues. And so like, what does it mean to quote unquote absorb a walking route into a mounted route? Because it seems like it would just seem that there are some places in the country that are urban enough that walking is the most efficient thing. And so, like, what does it mean to absorb a walking mount into a mounted route, and how does that make it more efficient?
Okay, well, if you put, CBUs or NBUs, well, it's like the same, it's almost the same term, but a CBU is where everyone on the street, maybe 15, 20 houses all go to this area to get their mail in like a locked box. By the way, this will also help with heat illness. Like if we're going to talk about safety and you're in a mail truck, let's say you're in the new mail truck that has an AC, let's just say, or you're in the Metro that has AC. You're going to be safer in the heat as well. You're not going to be walking around. Also, burglary or getting robbed, I believe you'll have a less chance of that while you're on a mounted route as well. That's another safety thing you can, also talk about. And then the safety team of the previous caller saying checking your proper shoes, regions where I live, there's ice everywhere. You're getting out less, so you're less of a safety risk. So now you have less worker comp claims. And as going back to your point though, what does it mean for to absorb? Well, obviously that walking route that is, let's say 8.5 hours, like on average, let's say, and you make it all mounted, it's going to turn into 6 hours. Now it's not a full route. Now we have a problem. And I totally understand. So now if you have an ox route in your office, you need to absorb that and slice it up and deviate it where geographically it's most convenient for, that route to still stay a full route.
Gotcha. All right.
Because you don't want to start cutting everyone's full-time position. All right. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thanks for the call. We did get one more. We'll go ahead and take this call since it's the last one, and then we do need to get to Eric. 760 area code. 760 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, my name is Daniel Knox, Escondido 2525. I'm the one that actually put out a resolution for open bargaining, and it got passed at the National Convention.
Congratulations.
The reason, yeah. Thank you. And I don't hold any position right now because I was a supervisor previously, and so I'm barred for 2 years. But come July, I'm going to be stepping up to stewardship. With that being said, the reason why I want to talk today is I think there's going to be some type of revisionist history of the president, and I think that he's going to try to get behind, he's that he was the linchpin that made this contract happen, and it's the membership. And it's just sorry, I'm a little nervous. Let me just take a moment to breathe. I feel a little I just feel so everything's so warped with how he's ran this campaign, and it's not for our best interest. In 15 days he went from 1.3 to 1.6 and 1.7. And that was in 15 days. And so I'm under the impression that he was drunk as a skunk when he was negotiating, which is not in our best interest. And we have Article 10 charges coming up, and my resolution's actually in there for the open bargaining. And I think that it was compromised and with an act of negligence, being drunk on the job, negotiating on our behalf. And so I hope that whoever is appointed to those Article 10 charges looks into the fact that he was drunk on the job, because it's an open fact that he hid behind his alcoholism, which is it's hard. My best friend is an alcoholic. He's recovered. He's now back in law school. He's going into his third year, and I'm proud of him. But I just I think he needed to get help, and I hope he gets help. Personally, I think he probably is a wonderful human being, but I don't think he is the best for this union. And he should have put his ego aside and accepted the fact that he needs to face some things. And we all go through that. I'm not going to take away his humanity, but he's not in our best interest. And that's why I'm supporting CLC. Because they have the infrastructure. As much as I love Mike Cariff, I think that he has the fire underneath him, but I don't think he has the infrastructure. So that's it.
All right. Thanks for the call, Daniel. Appreciate it. We've got Eric Blanc on the line, right? Eric Blanc is an assistant professor of labor studies at Rutgers University. Also has bylines in Jacobin, The Nation, and The Guardian, and author of the new book, We Are the Union, How Worker-to-Worker Organizing is Revitalizing Labor and Winning Big. Eric, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here.
So we wanted to talk to you about this book, and the book is, the title is pretty explanatory. You have this vision of worker-to-worker organizing, and you think that you've got some examples of how it's working, and you'd like to see that vision replicated across the broader labor movement in all sectors, public, private, all sorts of industries and everything like that. And I think that this is really relevant for, the conversation that we've been having over the last hour or so on the show about the Postal Service and how letter carriers have been organizing from the bottom up to reject tentative agreement and try to get something better. And so, I guess the first question that I have is, what made you want to write this book at this time?
Yeah, the book came out of an organizing experience, which was together with other labor organizers. We founded at the beginning of the pandemic an organization called the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which some listeners might know essentially now gives organizing support to any worker in any industry who's looking to fight back against the boss and to build a union. And so the EWOC experience came out of this crisis at the beginning of the pandemic, where workers were reaching out to the Bernie campaign, and we were sort of getting an ad hoc group of experienced labor organizers to volunteer our time to give workers support. And ever since, it's blossomed into this much bigger project with the support of United Electrical Union, Democratic Socialists of America. Thousands of workers have been trained up and built campaigns and got connected with unions. And so it was out of that organizing experience, it raised all sorts of questions about, what would it take to organize millions of workers in this country? Because we didn't have a large number of staff, and we were able and sort of obliged by circumstances to build a new type of structure to meet all of the demand of workers trying to organize. So I was starting to think about these questions, and then simultaneously with this, then in late 2021 and then in 2022 in particular, you have this real uptick in unionization across the United States, so Starbucks and Amazon in particular, but then also the UAW and other industries posed the question of, what is going on? There seems to be something new happening in the labor movement, this ferment from below, and it's taking new forms that we haven't seen in the past of organizing people, workers connecting with workers over Zoom nationwide. You're having these mass organizing training calls where workers are learning the tools of organizing, but then starting to organize themselves and then connecting with unions. So it was out of the sort of concrete experience of organizing, then with the strategic question of what does all this mean, and what are the strategic lessons of this experience, that I ended up doing the research for writing the book.
And so coming out of this research, then, how do you define worker-to-worker organizing? What is your definition for that, and how is it, and what are you defining this term in contrast to, right? What's the other kind of organizing that exists out there that you posit is kind of less ideal than worker-to-worker organizing?
Yeah, the worker-to-worker organizing, I use it as a contrast with what I call staff-intensive organizing, which is really actually takes a lot of different forms, but the one commonality of all these different types of staff-intensive organizing is that it depends to a really high degree on staff to move things forward. At its best, that type of organizing can actually be pretty effective. So if you have a good staffer oriented towards sort of building up worker power, it can be effective. And I actually don't argue in the book that you don't need staff or you don't need resources. The problem with that model, even at its best, because it has a lot of worse versions, but if we take it even at its best, the problem is it just can't scale. It can't win widely enough. Can't organize millions and tens of millions of workers because it's just too costly in terms of time and money to be able to reach that type of scale. And so in the book, I give a lot of data, talking about. Even if you were to use 30% of the entire budget of the labor movement, which would be really ambitious on new organizing, but through this model, you'd only get union density increase back to like 2015 levels. And even if you use the entirety of the labor movement's really massive budget right now, or its bank account rather, of over $30 billion, even if you were to use all of that money for new organizing through a staff intensive way, you'd only get to 2002 levels of union density. So even in the most ambitious, put all of the money in, which would never happen. We're lucky if we can get unions to spend 10% of their budget on organizing these days. But even if you were to try to do that through a staff intensive way, you wouldn't be able to organize the number of workers you need. And so this raises the question of a different model. And worker to worker organizing is essentially a type of labor organizing in which many of the tasks that normally are relegated to full-time staffers are done by workers. So 3 things in particular are different. One is who's training the other workers. So in a sort of more traditional staff-intensive campaign, it'll be a staff person is the person who's coaching up the workers in a given shop that wants to unionize. But to give an example of how that's looked different in the Starbucks campaign, for instance, in Buffalo, listeners might remember in late 2021, they won one store in Buffalo. All of a sudden, hundreds of Starbucks baristas all across the country are reaching out, sort of badgering these workers, saying, "How did you win? We want to do the same thing." And they didn't have staff. They didn't have staff to reach all of these people. They had very few resources. They were supported by a very tiny local and a tiny union, and so they had to rely on the workers themselves to get on Zoom and to start talking with their coworkers all across the country. And so that's one aspect. You have workers training other workers in how to organize. It's not that everything is just spontaneous and just workers on their own sort of miraculously understand how to organize. You still have to train you teach people skills and give them support, but workers are proven that they can do that, and it's not just full-time staffer can do it. The second thing is that workers oftentimes initiate these campaigns. So whereas in a lot of traditional, not all, but a lot of traditional union campaigns, the union will pick a target. So the union will say, okay, they'll research a bit of the company, or they have a campaign around specific workplaces, and then they'll reach out, they'll flyer workers as they're coming in, and the staff and the union picks the target. Here, the drives tend to be initiated by workers themselves, and oftentimes go very far in their organizing before they connect with the union. So here we've seen all across in a lot of different industries, organizing committees are built up, and they vote on which union to affiliate with. Are they going to affiliate with the Teamsters? Are they going to affiliate with, XYZ? This changes the dynamic, because when the organizers and the workers are sort of building their own power before being connected to an established union, it changes the relationship with how you relate to that established union. It tends to be one of partnership rather than deference, which is sort of the problem that you have in a lot of more traditional union drives. And the third and final thing about worker to worker unionizing is that workers are helping centrally set the strategy. It's not the case in these drives that workers are just sort of showing up at the picket line or doing some of the more basic tasks like passing out cards. They are centrally participating in the big decisions in the campaign, how to move it forward, when to file for a union election, what political stances to take, what messages to put over social media. These are things that oftentimes staff will do in a more traditional drive. But in these recent efforts, it tends to be workers who are also doing it. And so the combination of these 3 different factors poses a really kind of distinct organizing method. And the reason it matters is that it's a type of organizing that could actually organize millions and millions of workers and win. And that is, ultimately the necessity for it is that unless we have millions of workers organizing and unionizing, we're not going to be able to confront the crises that our country is facing.
And so how do you propose in your book to orient the labor movement kind of writ large to this? Because, a lot of the points that you kind of pointed out were like, one specifically you mentioned was that the workers themselves are kind of initiating these campaigns rather than the unions coming in and picking a target and initiating a campaign. And so how do we get the unions to get people to self-initiate? How do you propose that works?
Yeah, so the concept and term I use a lot for that process is seeding. So it's not the case that we should just sort of wait for workers on their own to rise up. I mean, that happens sometimes, but the most effective sort of wide scale tools to help workers start self-organizing is to do seeding, which is essentially finding ways to give the tools and inspiration for workers to start organizing. To give an example then, the United Auto Workers had an amazing strike at the Big Three in late 2023. Your listeners probably remember, right? Now, most unions would be completely content to just win a strike. I mean, if anything, that would be better than most unions. Most unions don't even strike. But let's just say, even the unions that do strike, if you can win a strike, or even better, if for most unions, if you don't have to strike, you can just sort of scare the company and have them give you a decent contract. Now, UAW understood that their strike in the Big Three was important to grab the attention of auto workers all across the country and to immediately pivot towards organizing the entire auto industry, because they understood that the power of auto workers depended on spreading to the non-union plants in the South. And the big question, for all auto workers is, how do you organize the whole industry so it's not just sort of these islands of unionization in the North? And so what they did is they used this strike to attract the attention of all auto workers, and they immediately, at the culmination of that strike, said, we're calling all auto workers across the country to start self-organizing. Every industry, you might remember, every single company, every part of the country, here are the tools you need to start organizing. And so it wasn't that they just sort of hoped that workers would start reaching out. They took steps to inspire, and then they gave tools necessary for workers to start taking that initiative on their own. And that culminated in rapidly increasing the organizing that led to the first union election win ever in a big auto plant in the South and in Tennessee, and then also to the spread of unionization drives in other places, including Mercedes in Alabama, as you know, which didn't win, but that is going to file again this coming year. And I think they're optimistic that they'll be able to eventually win. So again, you can see that these types of bottom-up organizing initiatives can be fueled by unions, even if they aren't sort of directly and immediately targeting them like they might have been in the past.
Right. That's interesting. And historically, I'm sure you know that worker-to-worker organizing, quote unquote, is something like what has actually happened in these big upsurges, particularly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm thinking about having read about the organization of coal miners in Alabama. And I read some letters from UMW organizers to John Lewis saying, I came to Alabama expecting to organize the coal miners, and the coal miners have already set up a local. Like I met with the local officials from this organization that has just spun up in reaction to the industry. And there was a conversation that you had on Left Reckoning that I really enjoyed, came out last week, where you mentioned that, in previous periods of American history, there was much more, like we were much more social kind of as a species. A coal miner in Alabama in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, in addition to being members of their unions and prior to being members of their unions, they were also maybe members of a fraternal or charitable society. They were also members of their church, right? They may have been members of some sort of recreational sporting league or something like that. And so because of these previously existing social ties, maybe there was like less work that had to be put in during a union campaign in kind of building trust and rapport and fraternal feeling between these coal miners and people in similar industries. And now, obviously, today in the year of our Lord 2025, many people are members of no organization. Not only are they non-union, they are not unionized, they don't go to church. They don't have a bowling league. They don't have a fraternity or other sort of charitable organization that they're part of. We are significantly more atomized. So, my question on that is, one, do you think that really is a significant impediment that exists today that did not exist, 100 years ago? And two, if yes, how do we fight that?
Yeah, it's a good question. In some ways, it's a central part of my book where I try to soberly look at the terrain we're on. Sometimes I think on the left and maybe in parts of the labor movement, we tend to gloss over or underestimate the extent of political, economic, social shifts over the last century. And so what you just laid out is entirely the case. And I go into some of the economic transformations that have led to that atomization in the book. But ultimately, what I try to look at in the book is, well, given that that is the terrain, given that working people are more atomized, that we don't live next to our coworkers like we used to, that we're not in the same sort of dense associational, cultural networks prior to unionization that we used to be in, what would it take to organize millions of people? And it's a tough question. It's part of the reason unionization is harder. It is because of that. And so where I land in here is trying to make sense of the wide scale organizing that we've had recently, because it shows that even on this new terrain, it is possible to overcome aspects of this atomization. And in some ways, maybe the hopeful piece of it is in some ways because of this atomization, people are looking to unionize. One of the inspiring things about unionization for folks who haven't ever participated in it, when you're building a new union in particular, or really any serious union fight, even if you're in a pre-existing union, is it's not just about the dollars and cents. It's about the, it's about the roses and not just the bread, right? It's about the connections you make with your coworkers. It's about the way you transform yourself and that your coworkers transform in the process of building something bigger. And that in itself becomes some of an attractive thing because you're part of something bigger than yourself in a way that in our society is much rarer than it used to be. But the flip side of that is how do you get large numbers of workers to start unionizing, given that they don't have this same sort of deep connection with the rest of the class to the same extent that they used to? And part of what the argument in the book is goes back to the prior question is, well, how do you start giving the tools and inspiration to large numbers of workers so that sort of mass scale organizing can happen? And so part of it is that you actually have to be much more proactive and much more wide scale in your efforts than you could in the past. You can't just focus on sort of a couple of key major factories or coal mines that were sort of centrally economic and geographically located. And then you could, based off of just taking out sort of the heart of a company via these pre-existing networks, then you'd have a ripple effect very easily. Here, the problem is that you win one union election and you still have a lot of work to do to connect other workers at that workplace to their coworkers nationwide. And you still have just a tremendous amount of work to help workers at a given workplace coalesce. And so one of the things that we've seen in EWOC and other unions are doing more recently is you have to actually build the ties, these sort of cultural ties, for lack of a better term, with your coworkers. It's an integral part of the unionization process, much more than it was 100 years ago, where those ties already existed. So what we call that in EWOC is socialize before you organize. That oftentimes the first best step you need to do if you're trying to organize a new shop is just get your coworkers together. And it's obviously best in person, but some people do it online, especially if your workplace is a remote workplace or people live really far from each other. Get people together in person, online, whatever it is, and just talk shit about the boss, get a drink, play video games. I'm not like personally into playing video games online, but the number of workers organizing committees, particularly like younger Zoomers, who like hung out online playing video games with their coworkers, was really high. And so if that's meaningful to you, great. Whatever it is, the question is how do you see your coworkers as sort of human beings and as as something that part of socially, that it's not just you atomized, you're part of something bigger. And so whatever you can do to build those ties is just going to go a really, really long ways towards building the type of power necessary to win. And I would say just one last thing is because there is this level of atomization, I do think the question of like social media and um, is important. I think that getting the sort of hype about unionization and the stories of workers fighting back going viral over digital means is part of the reason we've seen the uptick in union organizing since late 2021. These tools are powerful. Obviously, they're owned by horrible corporations, but they give it a possibility for workers learning from workers, from connecting with other workers, and having some sort of sense of being part of something bigger. That what frankly was hard 10, 15 years ago when you didn't have the same immediacy of being able to connect with people outside of your sort of immediate locale. So that's another, I think, big theme of the book is the way that digital tools have created new possibilities for overcoming some of these sort of atomization divides and geographic divides.
That's interesting. And so, how are you seeing your prescriptions as different from other attempts by the labor movement to engage volunteers in a bigger way? I know that you don't think that you're the first person to have had the idea like, oh, it would be great if we could get workers to do it themselves, like other people have had that idea. And one of those in particular, one of the iterations of an attempt to implement that idea was Working America, an initiative by the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO and unions have also had union organizing workshops that are open to the public. We've done some of those here in North Alabama. And so I guess what do you think that we can learn from the failures and limited successes even of these past experimentations within the labor movement of trying to engage volunteers in a bigger way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the few things. If you look at the overarching practice of union organizing in its last big push towards trying to organize the unorganized. So this is really like the 1990s, early 2000s, new voices, sort of transformation of the AFL-CIO. Think about like early SEIU, John Sweeney. This was the last time that the labor movement, up until just last year or two, few years, made a serious concerted effort to organize millions of workers. And the practice of that moment was very staff intensive. There was attempts to get volunteers, but it really was extremely staff intensive. Just to give an example, there was thousands, tens of thousands of young people were recruited into the labor movement, and overwhelmingly it was to become staffers in campaigns. It wasn't, for instance, to become salts. So just to give one really concrete example, one of the things that I think makes this type of model different, or one sort of practical way to think about what it would be different. It's if you're trying to recruit someone to join the labor movement, are you trying to recruit them to be a staffer, or are you trying to recruit them to be a salt? I'm not saying you shouldn't recruit staffers. We need a lot more staffers as well. But I would argue that at this point, the thing we're missing more than staffers in particular is workers organizing with their coworkers. And it's just the reality is I think that you can be more effective as an organizer if you're organizing on the shop floor and not from the outside. So I don't think that I'm at all reinventing the wheel, but I think it is worth saying that the dominant practices of labor organizing haven't been based off of volunteers. And I actually have a lot of data in the book that even in 2022, so I reached out to every union drive that went public in 2022. And so that was over 2,000 drives. And so I got all this data from the worker leaders. And I asked all of the worker leaders if their union had asked them to volunteer for a new drive. So these are people who led union drives, right? These are people who have experience, who have the kind of fire in their belly. The overwhelming majority of workers who had organized their own shop had never been asked by their union to go support another shop. And then I asked them afterwards, well, would you be willing to? 80% of them said yes. So just to give you a sense, so this type of practice is very much not the norm. So it's true that there's exceptions, but the question is, how do you scale up this type of more bottom-up organizing? So it's not that no one's ever done it before, but to do it at scale is something that's new. What Starbucks Workers United is doing, what the News Guild is doing with its member-to-member organizing program, which is what I I think that actually that's probably the most developed member to member organizing program. I go into detail in the book about all of the structures and practices they have. Their entire philosophy is workers can and should be trained to do everything that a staff person normally does. And it doesn't just happen automatically. They have monthly trainings in which they teach every month a new skill. They have these really, really sort of elaborate benchmark and organizing trackers where every worker has to have a sort of a spreadsheet of the skills they've learned, whether they've learned it, whether they've done it, whether they've taught it. They have pods of people, so you're connecting with 10 workers across the country. So it's not just that you have one training once off and then you're on your own, but you're connecting with a group of about 10 to 12 workers nationwide. So you're constantly sharing experiences, stories, and learning from each other. So these are structures that are definitely not the norm in the labor movement. And I think that what I try to do in the book is to talk about the best practices that I've seen that, I didn't invent them, but that I've seen that unions are doing, with the case then that like more unions should essentially be organizing along these models.
The News Guild is definitely, News Guild and Starbucks for sure are undoubtedly the most successful unions as far as bringing in new units over the last 4 years. And that member-to-member organizing stuff that the News Guild has, that sounds really, really interesting. We might try to get somebody from the News Guild. You might have given me a guest suggestion there. That sounds really cool. And so one of the things that you mentioned as we've been talking is EWOC. That stands for the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. That is a project of the DSA and the United Electrical Workers. And you've put that forward as well as something that you would like to see done, although obviously on a bigger scale. Could you give us like some information on EWOC? It's been a project since 21, I think, since 2021.
Since March 2020. It literally started
Okay.
as a Google form we set up at the beginning of the pandemic, because those of us who were organizers for the Bernie campaign were getting this influx of workers reaching out to the Bernie campaign saying, my boss wants me to go in. We don't have any masks. My coworker has COVID. What can I do to fight back? So it was born out of the COVID sort of emergency, and that now has emerged into something much bigger. And I think for listeners who, for instance, are not in a union already, you should go get support from EWOC. So you can go to workerorganizing.org. So workerorganizing.org, you just fill out a form. Within 72 hours, an experienced organizer will call you back and start helping you take the steps to start organizing. That's essentially what EWOC does. So you should do it if you're not in a union, especially at this moment when we need so many more people building power at work. And I think the reality is every union should be doing this. Every union should be encouraging extremely widely workers to start organizing. It's one of the really sad things that we have to deal with in EWOC is so many workers who reach out to us say, I reached out to 7 different unions. None of them ever called me back. This is very, very, very common because a lot of unions don't put resources towards organizing, and they don't have a culture of organizing, and also they have a very expensive model that doesn't rely on volunteers, so they're extremely picky and choosy about sort of which union drive that they'll take on. And so many workers sadly reach out to unions and never hear back. And so really what unions should be doing is the exact opposite. They should be telling all workers, all working people, any job can be a union job. If your life is not where you want it to be, if your workplace is not what you want it to be, you need to unionize, and we're going to give you the tools necessary to turn that around. And so it is somewhat of a question of scale. It's not that nobody's ever organized a training before, but are you proactively finding ways to get that message out to millions of workers? EWOC is a small organization, so we're connected to a socialist organization and a small union, but the AFL-CIO could be doing this. Central Labor Councils could be doing this. They could be having so that every member of an existing union would know that once a month there's going to be an online training or an in-person training that they should be inviting their friends who aren't in union to, that they should be inviting their family members to union to. Like, that isn't the norm, right? And so we need to be sort of integrating these practices into the whole labor movement so that we can meet this moment and sort of defeat Trumpism and the billionaires. And I think that there's a level of routinism and complacency too much still in the labor movement that we need to desperately break out of.
Yeah. I think that sounds really cool, and maybe giving me another idea might be I don't know, might try to work on maybe some sort of formal partnership between our labor council and EWOC. That might be that might be something that folks would be interested in. Does EWOC have data about what they've done over the last 4-5 years, as far as like, how many calls have they fielded, how many of those turn into campaigns, how many of those turn into union elections, how many of those have resulted in contracts? Do y'all have information like that?
We have good data on it. I mean, off the top of my head, I can tell you that there's two main things EWOC does. Is one is we field leads essentially who come in. Well, we sort of seed leads and then we field them, and we've had thousands of different campaigns. Hundreds have resulted in a union. We've unionized the campaigns that we've helped organize. I believe we unionized tens of thousands of workers at this point, right? Because you have one worker reaching out, but then they're organizing hundreds of workers. And some of these have been really major campaigns. I mean, most recently, we supported the Whole Foods workers who unionized and won the first sort of Whole Foods union election victory under Amazon ever. So they reached out to EWOC and we gave them training, gave them support. And they won an insanely amazing historic victory against a very intense employer and intense union busting campaign. So on my end, the main thing I work on is the trainings. So we do these sort of bi-monthly organizing trainings that are open to anybody. And I think we're up to 4,000 workers who've been trained through these over the last, over the last 4 years now? So 5 years. So yeah, I think it's still smaller than we need it to be for turning everything around for the labor movement, but it shows that even with so few resources, you can reach so many workers if you have an approach that is sort of along the lines that I described.
Right. Well, that's really great. The book is We Are the Union, Eric Blanc. Really appreciate your work on that. As we're wrapping up, I wanted to kind of, I mean, it's not exactly shifting topics, but it's a little bit shifting the focus, and that is, I think it was on Left Reckoning that you said that you've been focusing a lot of your work right now on supporting federal workers who are organizing against what the Trump administration is trying to do, particularly with FUN, the Federal Unionists Network, friends of the show, and so why do you think it is so important for federal workers to be organizing in this moment, and so important that you're spending a lot of your time supporting those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that people asked about the book over the last few months was, is it still going to be relevant under Trump? And I said, yeah, it will be, because no matter who's in power, you can unionize, which is true. But I didn't actually expect it to be so immediately clear how relevant it would be, because basically the federal workers have been forced by necessity to organize on a worker-to-worker basis, because they're in unions that don't have a strong organizing tradition. They haven't, had to strike or to unionize new shops. And so there isn't like a structure from above that they could rely on to fight back. The unions are mostly pursuing a very legalistic strategy, which is fine. It's good for them to do that, but it's not going to build a type of power able to beat back Musk and Trump. And so the local union presidents and rank and file workers had to take the initiative, and they reached out to me, and because they knew that I was an EWOC and been working on exactly this type of project. Like, what do you do? How do you build mass scale worker power when you don't have a lot of resources? So this is all I've been thinking about for 4 or 5 years, and I sort of dove into supporting them on the back end. And my wife is very mad at me because I got like no sleep for the last 2 weeks because there was a big day of action on Wednesday. And I think the reason it's important to organize is sort of obvious, is that Musk is trying to destroy them. Musk is trying to destroy the federal workforce and federal services, and he understands, and Trump understands, that the existence of strong labor unions in the federal sector is a major block on their ability to impose their reactionary agenda. So they need to terrorize the workforce into complying with their like authoritarian power grab, even if it's illegal. They can fire the heads of agencies, but they still need a workforce that is going to sort of obey orders. And if you have a union and you have workers who are organized who aren't going to necessarily go along with whatever illegal reactionary agenda is being imposed from above, well, then you need to break those unions. And if you're able to break those unions, that in turn is going to allow you, MAGA, Trump, Musk, to then have the ability to go after everybody next. And so right now they understand from above that the crucial thing they have to do is terrorize and destroy the federal unions, and then they can go after immigrants, trans people, leftists, and in turn, every employer in the country is going to try to copycat Musk now if he gets away with it. If Musk can just sort of force workers to resign and then force the half that stay to work double the work for the same pay or less, why wouldn't every company try to do that, right? And we saw the danger of that in the PATCO strike in 1981. Reagan fires federal air traffic controllers, unleashes a one-sided class war from above for the next decade. And so I think that the stakes of the federal workers' struggle for the whole labor movement are extremely high, and that it's urgent that the other unions start actually taking much more action. And it was encouraging to see folks who came out on Wednesday, for the Day of Action. But frankly, we need far more union support in the federal sector, but then also in the whole labor movement to understand that federal workers are first. They're the canary in the coal mine. And so there does have to be not just sort of rhetoric around injury to one is injury to all, but putting that into practice, because the fate of the entire labor movement is really at stake right now. Trump, they're going to run over all of us unless we can stop them right now. So I do think that for all the listeners and unionists out there, understand the crucial sort of stakes of the federal worker struggle. And if you want to get involved and support, the best way to do that is to just contact fund through the website they set up, which is go.savepublicservices.com. So the website is go.savepublicservices.com. Just put your contact in there, whether you're a federal worker or not, and then you'll hear about the next steps that fund is getting in the works to scale up a campaign that can defeat Musk.
And, since federal workers can't strike,
legally.
Can't strike legally. Although, to be honest, for many federal workers, the Trump administration would love nothing more than for us to strike so that he could have a legal basis on which to fire us. And so, given that, there's the legal problem with striking for federal workers, but then there's also the strategic problem because, there's a lot of he would love to just be able to totally eliminate as many federal workers as possible, right? And so there's a real kind of strategic problem with federal workers striking too. What avenues exist for federal workers to pressure the government into backing down from these really extreme attacks on federal workers and the people that we serve?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that you're right that the strike is not something that is sort of on the table in the immediate because it's too risky, and much more so than in other industries for the reasons you explained. I think the good news is that Musk is very vulnerable. These attacks are extremely unpopular. If you look at the recent polls that came out across the board in the last few days, just the vast majority of Americans don't support what they're doing. It's really, really remarkable, including large numbers of Republicans. And so the thing that needs to happen to win is there needs to be enough public backlash that forces Trump to essentially throw Musk to the wolves. And that's possible because, Trump is an opportunist. Trump's number one sort of goal is to preserve his control and power, much more so than any sort of deep ideological agenda. And so if there's enough public backlash, that I do think that will force them to retreat. The question then is, how do you generate that level of public backlash, especially when you can't strike? Or it doesn't seem like you can strike. There's all sorts of things that can happen. I mean, the major mechanism is you need to grab the attention of the public to shift and change the narrative. So you need to have actions that tell the community that these attacks on federal workers are attacks on everybody, right? How are you going to get your Social Security? How are you going to get your Medicare? How are you going to get your Medicaid? How are you going to have safe drinking water if there are no federal workers or if there's a decimated federal workforce? The stakes of this impact everybody. And that story is only beginning to get out there. So I think that what we need to start seeing is, obviously more big protests that can spread the word and, going on the media circle and everything. But I think probably what we're going to need is a lot of mass civil disobedience, frankly. You don't need to strike, but you can sit in, you can protest when any workers get fired, you can have sort of a Occupy/Madison 2010 type spirit, where there's all sorts of ways to sort of grab the attention of the public and to create a political crisis, even if it's not just withholding your labor. And so I do think that type of dynamic is going to be necessary to sort of pose the question directly and insistently and sharply to the American public that federal workers are fighting back to be able to continue serving the public. And the only people benefiting from these cuts is this tiny, tiny minority handful of the richest people on the planet who want to privatize these services for their private gain. And so that to my mind is the sort of path forward. And I'm optimistic, actually, despite everything, that we can win.
Go.savepublicservices.com is the website. Go.savepublicservices.com. Our Labor Council did an event on the February 19th with the Chattanooga and Knoxville Labor Councils. We did a joint press conference in Chattanooga where we spoke about some of these issues and the attacks on federal workers. And one of the things that I spoke about in my portion of the press conference was how I kind of did the Bernie Sanders thing where I mentioned that, I don't often agree with Elon Musk, but I do agree that we need major government reform. But by that, I mean the opposite of what he does. I think we need to reinvigorate and unleash the public sector for the public good. In your mind, thinking into the future, with a new administration and a new mandate, what do you think that a reinvigorated public sector and unleashed public sector could look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the starting point would be you have to stop starving these services. One of the really bizarre things about Musk and Trump's attacks right now about parasite class, this portrayal of this massive bloated bureaucracy is that the actual trend has been the exact opposite. If you look at the percentage of the workforce that works for the federal government, it's been declining for 40 years, right? It's just not the case that federal workers are just growing and growing at the expense of everything. They're doing the same amount of work, but for a massively increased population, and they haven't had the resources that they need to succeed. And this is always what the problem in the public sector is that when you have underfunded public services, it does become a real challenge to provide as good services as are sort of required, and that can lead to skepticism from people from below. That raises the possibility that maybe there's a better alternative in the private sector. So we need to show through practice what good public services can do. And there's plenty of examples of this. The reality is, despite all this demonization, people like getting their Social Security. People like their public schools. If you ask people if they like their public schools, they like them. And so I think we can point to the specific things that are already happening and tell those stories and show that even when an underfunded service, like, look at how powerful the VA is. How would our veterans survive, if it weren't for the support that they're given? So part of it is like just doing what is being done, but much better. And I think so part of that is the funding, and part of it is actually, frankly, is just having more union power, so that instead of these often, there is a real question of bureaucracy. I don't think that we should sort of cede entirely the terrain that the federal government is organized in the ideal way. I think it is, top down and can be unresponsive, but the best sort of force for turning these services into a more dynamic vehicle is to give unions more power, so that they can have, input from below and from the community on how to best serve, because their workers are in the best position to know how their agencies could be improved. And so I think that building union power with better funding is sort of the sweet spot for a combination to get the kind of services that we need. And, we see in U.S. history and all across the world still what a good public service can look like. It's not, it's not like a utopian pie dream. It's just, you just need more of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you need to, empower the workers who do the work, and you need to make sure there's enough staff. I went through like agency by agency. OSHA has 50% less staff than it did in 1950. The NLRB's, regional offices have half as much staff as they did only 10 years ago. And so agency by agency, it's a very similar story. And so, the idea that like you said, it's huge and bloated is just not congruent with reality, so then it becomes obvious why at so many of these agencies, you do have, there becomes more friction, right? With when you have degraded public services, and then people try to go and access those services, they feel more friction, and it takes longer, and it's frustrating, and all of that redounds to the benefit of the people who want to privatize these services or eliminate them entirely. Because if every interaction that you ever have with the IRS is just mind-numbingly irritating, then that is going to make you more antagonistic towards the government and towards the IRS, as opposed to allowing the IRS employees to make it convenient for you and to, give you clear guidance very quickly and all of this kind of stuff, and to turn things around really quickly. Well, they don't have enough staff. And, with them firing so many probationary employees into tax season, I think that those kinds of frustrations are only going to amplify. And that's, the importance of putting forward an alternative vision where services are easy to use and accessible and low to no cost, all provided by well-paid federal employees who are union members, is really important in these conversations. So, Eric, really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we let you go?
No, I plugged EWOC, so that's workerorganizing.org. I plugged FUN, that's go.savepublicservice.org. And yeah, if folks want to get a copy of my book, you sort of just look for We Are the Union anywhere online. It's pretty easy to get. And I hope you all like it and be in touch.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Great. Bye.
All right, folks. We Are the Union, Eric Blanc. Check out that book if you have the time. Enjoyed that conversation. Adam, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, though, and I'm thinking about some ideas that we might could implement and how to just get more workers involved. That's the bottom line. We have to have more workers involved, and so appreciate Eric's emphasis on that question.
We were talking about federal workers, and Eric mentioned that federal workers had a day of action last week protesting the actions of the administration, and so wanted to go through a few of those. A friend of the show, Chris Doles, was on CNN last weekend. Only a few hours after our program went off the air, he was on CNN talking about the upcoming day of action, and here's what he had to say about the man behind so many of these cuts to federal jobs and to the services that we provide the American people.
I think they're trying to deepen a crisis that already exists, which is the funding crisis, that our public services aren't sufficiently supported already. Federal workers are overworked as is. They're trying to deepen that crisis to justify further privatization. You look at Elon Musk, who's, of course, the architect and executioner here. He's already benefiting from more than $18 billion in federal contracts over the last 10 years. And he calls recipients of federal aid parasites. Elon Musk is the parasite here.
So exactly right. That's exactly correct, and really exciting opportunity for him to be able to go and tell that to folks listening on CNN. Maybe he'll be on Fox this weekend. Probably not likely that they'll allow him to do that, but I mentioned that our Labor Council cooperated with the Chattanooga and Knoxville Labor Councils to hold a press conference around this day of action that the group that Chris Doles is supporting was putting on last week. Here is a clip from a portion of my address at the press conference where I talked about that idea that the government is so wasteful, it's gotten so big, et cetera, et cetera.
First, this whole idea about the government being too big, it's gotten out of control. It is not true. It is simply not the case. Contrary to that narrative, across the government, in agency after agency, what you will actually find if you talk to the people who work for a living in these agencies is that they are underfunded and understaffed. At the Social Security Administration, they have their lowest staffing levels in 50 years. And yet, obviously, more people receive Social Security than ever in the history of this country. At the National Labor Relations Board, the agency remains understaffed after flat funding in 9 of the past 10 years. In the past 2 decades, their staffing in field offices has shrunk by 50%. We have half as many people enforcing the National Labor Relations Act as we did 10 years ago. At OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they have half the staff that they did in 1980. In Decatur, Alabama, where I have members, a manufacturing plant for that creates appliances for GE, only weeks ago received a fine of approximately $200,000 for the responsibility that for the death of a worker that their poor safety practices resulted in. They got the fine less than a month ago. 2 weeks after they got that fine, somebody else at that facility was taken to the hospital because of a workplace accident. When this death happened this summer, there was immediately reporting of OSHA on site. So far, and I've been monitoring it closely, there has not been any discussion in the news of OSHA investigating this workplace safety accident at this facility. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has 30% less staff than they did in the 1980s. At the FAA, 90% of the towers are understaffed. It is also not a coincidence that the federal workers that are receiving the most ire from Elon Musk and his and company are the ones that would seek to put any level of constraint on him, because he believes that he should not have to worry about how his actions and the actions of his corporations affect others. He wants us to believe that when the National Labor Relations Board lays out clear and convincing evidence that he has fired workers at his companies because of their union support rather than their performance, that when the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau wants to ensure that whatever deals Elon's Twitter makes with Visa protects consumers, that when the FAA wants to ensure that when he blows up rockets in our airspace, it does not negatively affect Americans. He wants us to believe that all of that is just a weaponized government attacking him and targeting him rather than protecting us from him.
Additionally, as Eric said earlier in the program, the percentage of workers who work for the federal government was in a steep decline until the year 2000 or so, and it's been basically flat ever since then. Federal employee compensation only makes up approximately 4% of the federal budget. Compare that to 12% for federal contractors. Eliminating jobs is simply not going to be the thing that gets us out of the deficit, if that's something that you care about. Cordell Martis, a letter carrier from here in Huntsville, talked about how letter carriers are overworked and things like that at this press conference as well. Here's Cordell.
One of the things I've been hearing is about corporate takeover. As we were talking about, they mentioned Elon Musk, and I just was doing a little research myself, and we have to unite together to oppose these billionaires, because they want to lobby to Congress to pass laws and legislation that's going to be more beneficial to them and more demanded on us. Long story short, the working class, we have been the muscle of America since its inception, and we still are. And we just have to realize how much power we have. So we have to continue to stick together, despite our many, many, many differences, because we got many differences. We come from all areas, but one thing in common is, man, we got to make ends meet for our families. Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of them, man, they got all the money, man. They don't need more kickbacks and more tax cuts to get them more money off our dime while we steadily, it reminds me, I felt myself, I said, man, I feel like the hamster on that wheel. You working harder, but you're going nowhere fast. And we've come too far in the labor movement to accept any of this.
So really enjoyed his talk there, Cordell from Branch 462 here in Huntsville. We might be putting up a video of the whole press conference on our YouTube page at some point. As you could hear, there was a lot of kind of scratching noises. That's because the mic that was at the podium was difficult to see, and so we kept hitting it on accident. So I'll see if we can kind of figure that out in post and make it a little bit easier to listen to for the full clip, for the full video if we put that out. But events like that were happening all across the country, and it was really exciting to see, and really going to be looking forward to seeing actions like that continue across the country. We had a pretty good turnout there at the Ironworkers Local 704 Union Hall in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Lots of union members and just folks from the community coming out to support federal workers. So that was really, really cool. Like I mentioned in last week in Southern Layoffs, there continues to be lawsuits against a lot of these firings. They're illegal. I mean, they're just facially not legal. Congress and the civil service regulations have procedures for reducing force, for firing for cause, and none of those have been followed. So, if the federal courts abide by the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, a lot of this stuff is going to be undone, but not before it has huge, huge damages on, federal workers and our families and our communities and the people that we serve. So we'll continue to be following that, and I hope that folks get involved in these actions across the country in their communities as well. So we're coming up on the end of the show here. Adam, was there anything, any thoughts that you had about any of this?
Well, I just wanted to say solidarity with all the federal workers who are being impacted. I mean, it's really troubling to see people losing their jobs. I remember a time when politicians would brag about creating jobs. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see other people cheer that on. I'm really disappointed when you see fellow workers who cheer it on, right? Because they're living vicariously through the TV and internet antics of billionaires, of oligarchs. And it is frustrating, but I do remember that billions of dollars have been spent on propaganda to divide people, to distract people, to demoralize people and divide us. But ultimately, the more we stick together, as Cordell said, the stronger we'll be. I think canary in the coal mine is correct in terms of federal workers. These sort of trends of like mergers and consolidations and layoffs, this is something that cycles through the corporate industry as well. And, it's going to be really imperative that all of labor stands up and supports the labor of these federal workers. I mean, these are folks who are fellow workers. They have families to feed. They have bills to pay. Their paychecks circulate in our local economies. So there's a ripple effect on our entire community. So I'm heartened to see the growth in the federal unions and the activities of Federal Unionist Network, FUN. Really encourage folks to get out and support them however they can. Get involved in your local labor council. Get involved in your local union, whatever union that may be. You heard from Eric earlier, if you're not in a union, and 90% of workers are not at this time, you can reach out to EWOC and to others to try to start organizing. We can't do it alone. That's the whole point of collective action. We do it together. So I would just encourage folks to be having those conversations with coworkers, neighbors, friends, family, see who you can get engaged. Because it's easy to get disheartened by the hostile folks who have been propagandized, but there's a whole lot of folks out there who are just disengaged. They are demoralized. They are out of the loop. They are not really plugged in to what's going on around them. And those are folks we have to reach as well. I think we can reach those who are hostile sometimes and bring them back into the fold. But we really got to, talk to those folks who right now aren't doing anything for whatever reason, sometimes really good reasons and understandable reasons. But often they're isolated and they need support. And so that's how we got to build a movement with a lot of people, because we need that sort of mass movement energy in this country. Again, we haven't had it in generations. It's not a coincidence that from the 1930s through the 1960s, we saw a massive upsurge of people power and mass mobilization of everyday working class people. We saw that and we won a lot, right? We won a lot from this government. We won a lot from the states. We won a lot of material benefits from corporate America. It's not to say it was all perfect. It obviously wasn't. But we won a lot because we stood together and we stood up for what was right. And I think that's our challenge ahead.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everyone tuning in today. Appreciate all the support of the Valley Labor Report. Just reminder that if you didn't get a chance to call in today, leave us a voicemail throughout the week. We really appreciate those.
Yeah, absolutely. 844-899-TVLR is where you can leave a voicemail, 844-899-8857. Going to go ahead and wrap up the show today. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll have another good show ready for you next week. So we'll see you then. All power to the workers.